Arya Stark stood at the bow of a small fishing vessel that she had purchased with the last of her coin. The sail flapped overhead, an echo of ghosts in the quiet dawn. She had left so many things behind, but the memories clung to her with invisible claws. In the early light, she could still see the flickers of all she had lost, her father's stern smile, her mother's worrisome but tender eyes, Robb's sturdy stance, and the glimmer of Winterfell's ancient halls. Their echoes often found her at dawn, the hour when the world held its breath between waking and dreaming. Her face was set in silent determination, for she had made a choice. She had promised herself she would explore the edges of the world, but life and fate were never so simple. She had discovered a new calling in the craft she had learned under the tutelage of the Faceless Men. One she had adapted, shaped, and twisted into her own. She would teach others. It began when she realized that wandering without direction did not soothe her restless heart. She found no peace across the sea, drifting from one unremarkable port to the next, always attempting to outrun her ghosts. She had left Westeros to find adventure, and she had seen wonders beyond the horizon, vast forests of swaying trees in the far east, deserts made of whispering dunes in the south, jagged peaks that cut the clouds in half in the west. But even in the marvel of endless seas and foreign cities, she felt her purpose slip through her like water through a broken sieve. The more she traveled, the more she realized her life had always been intertwined with the land of her birth. So, she had returned. In her mind, the cold wind of the north still called her name, though she did not sail directly there. Instead, she took a winding route that drew her along the coastline of the Stormlands, across to the rocky shores of Pike, and finally up the western coast, letting the sea breeze and the changing tides guide her steps. She observed how the realm had changed. There were new lords and old grudges. A tenuous peace held the pieces of the Seven Kingdoms together, but Arya sensed the cracks beneath that fragile veneer. The scars of the war were slow to heal. Children still begged for scraps in the smaller towns, castles still carried blackened stones from the fires of old battles, and hearts across Westeros remained guarded. She anchored in a small cove one day at dawn, setting foot on a rocky beach where no soul seemed to linger. The salt air whipped through her dark hair as she hiked inland, discovering a ruined keep no one had cared to rebuild. Ivy coated its crumbling walls, the windows were empty holes, and the gate lay half-broken, but it stood. She felt something resonate within her. An echo of her time among the Faceless Men. A place hidden from the rest of the world, where secrets could be nurtured. For 3 nights, she slept in the keep's courtyard under the open sky, using old blankets and furs she had purchased in a nearby fishing village. Ravens circled overhead, cawing in dissonant songs. She listened to them, letting their calls drift into her dreams, weaving possibilities of what she might do. On the 4th day, she caught a trio of orphans pilfering from her small stores. A scrawny boy with a shaved head and 2 little girls, faces smudged, eyes wide. Arya saw her younger self in their hungry gaze, remembering how it felt to be alone and desperate, how it felt to hide in stables or under the open sky. Something in her heart gave way. Instead of chasing them off, she offered them food. They sat around a small fire while she watched them warily. They were reluctant to speak, but eventually the boy said his name was Darren, and the older of the girls named herself Let. The younger, not more than 4, was called Maya. They had no family, no roof, and had stumbled upon the half-ruined keep in search of shelter. Arya considered them and realized she could do for them what no one had done for her at their age. She could teach them how to survive. More than that, she could teach them the dangerous skills she had once been taught, albeit in a place far from Westeros. In the weeks that followed, others stumbled upon the keep. At first, it was merely more orphans, lost travelers, or outcasts from nearby hamlets, hoping to find a place among the ruins where they could hide from the cruelty of a world that had little mercy for the weak. Perhaps rumors had spread in secret. A ghost in a battered keep, a small woman with a dagger's smile, offering respite. Or perhaps these desperate souls found their way by chance. Arya accepted them all. At first, it was a matter of providing them with shelter and teaching them the simplest skills: how to move silently, how to defend themselves with a short blade, how to find water and food in a forest. She recalled the training in Bravos, though she had never been a perfect disciple of the many-faced god. She took the pieces she had learned: stealth, discipline, fluidity, awareness, and adapted them to her own brand of teaching. Soon, the crumbling keep was alive with hushed footsteps at dawn and quiet gatherings around a lone fire at night. Though she used no formal ranks, no rigid instruction, Arya developed a rhythm that those around her followed. At sunrise, she would wake them and lead them through warm-up drills that tested their balance, speed, and awareness. She had them fight with wooden swords, then with staffs, all the while reminding them that an assassin needed to be fluid, not just strong. She had them walk the ramparts of the broken walls, balancing on narrow stone edges to conquer their fear of heights. At midday, they gathered in the ancient hall where the roof was partly caved in, letting in beams of sunlight. There, they listened to her lessons about reading a mark's habits, about concealment, about analyzing a target's weaknesses. In the evenings, they might hunt for small game in the surrounding woodlands or practice the art of lying unseen in the shadows, controlling their breath until they were indistinguishable from the stone and grass. Arya did not set out to create an order, but one took shape regardless. A handful of the older orphans, along with wanderers she had accepted, became her first adepts, though she never used such a word. She taught them what it meant to strip away their identities, to wear faces if necessary, to hone their skills. But she did not teach them to abandon their sense of self. Her training was not that of the faceless men in its entirety, for she recognized the heartbreak in forgetting one's name. She knew the sorrow that came from discarding every thread of your former life. Westeros was not Braavos, and she was not the kindly man. She adapted what she had learned into something new. Each of her pupils kept their names, but they learned to assume others. They did not worship the many-faced god, though they came to respect the power of death's inevitability. Many had lost family in the wars, had seen that death was a daily visitor in Westeros, friend to no one, foe to everyone. She made them see that death was a force they must neither fear nor worship, but a fact of life they could, in certain ways, shape and direct. The keep slowly grew. Quietly, they rebuilt sections of it, patching holes in the walls with timber from the forest, reinforcing the gatehouse, rigging trapdoors in the courtyard. The younger children tended a small garden, and several older ones learned to fish or hunt more efficiently. As the moons passed, the ragged band that Arya had gathered turned into a close-knit group of survivors, living on the fringes of the realm. She had no illusions of forming an army. Her purpose was smaller, sharper. They would be the blades in the dark, the watchers who could tilt the balance of power if tyranny rose once more. She was forging them into quiet guardians, though some among them hungered for the lethal skills she alone could teach. In the early days, she told them little of her past. A few recognized the name Stark, or they guessed from her manner that she was of high birth once. But she never claimed a title. Instead, she continued to shape them as the days bled into seasons. She taught them the water dance, the Braavosi style of swordsmanship she had once learned from Syrio Farrell in King's Landing. She taught them to read body language, to observe the twitch of a muscle in a guard's face or the tension in a merchant's shoulders. She taught them to become no one at a moment's notice, to shift their voice and posture so thoroughly that a passing stranger would never guess they were the same person from one day to the next. As the snows began to threaten, she sent a few of her older recruits south on covert tasks, one to gather intelligence, another to locate safe houses, another to follow the movement of certain lords she suspected of stoking old rebellions. In time, these recruits returned with news. The lords bickered among themselves, the king on the Iron Throne struggled with matters of succession, and small folk whispered that a new wave of chaos might be brewing. Westeros had never been a quiet place, and though the Great War against the Army of the Dead was long over, the memory of strife and shifting loyalties remained. Arya listened carefully. She did not trust the monarchy to keep the realm stable, but she did not wish to overthrow it either. Her goal was simpler, to ensure that if darkness rose again, she would have a network of individuals capable of striking it down swiftly and silently before it could consume the innocent. She did not recruit actively, but word traveled in hushed rumors. Some said a Stark girl who once traveled the world had returned, forging a circle of masked warriors. Others spoke in fear of a cult that worshipped the many-faced god. Some believed it was only a gathering of thieves, scoundrels, and bastards. The rumors varied. Arya did not mind. She preferred confusion. It kept the curious at bay. Still, more came, attracted by the chance of protection, belonging, or the promise of power. She did not turn all away, only those whose hearts she judged rotten. She had grown adept at reading eyes, at sensing the darkness in a person's spirit. Those who relished cruelty or took pleasure in suffering had no place in her hidden keep. One morning, she rose from her bedroll in the small tower she claimed as her quarters. She buckled needle at her hip, though she seldom used that sword for training. She reserved it for personal matters, for memories of the day her brother John had given it to her. Outside, the courtyard was alive with quiet activity. She watched from a broken window as about a dozen figures crept in a circle, practicing footwork with short blades. Others scaled a makeshift climbing wall in silence, sweat gleaming on their brow. The boy Darren was no longer so scrawny. He had grown a few inches, put on muscle, and learned to move with surprising grace. Let had turned into a tall, whip-fast fighter with a penchant for archery. Even Maya, just a slip of a thing, was learning the basics of infiltration, her small size an advantage in tight spaces. Arya felt a twinge of pride, recalling her own growth in the House of Black and White, her mistakes and humiliations, the harsh lessons that had eventually shaped her into someone so deadly that she had once changed the fate of the entire realm. Now, she saw these children of misfortune forging themselves into a silent force. She descended into the yard, where they ceased their drills and turned to her. She took them through the forms of the water dance, as she had done countless times. Swift as a deer, quiet as a shadow. The words echoed from a memory of Sirio Farrell, and it made her heart pinch with nostalgia. As she corrected their stances, she felt the passage of time. She was no girl anymore. The lines on her face told a story of countless hardships. Yet she possessed a certain confidence that defied every scar. When a loud crack shattered the stillness, someone had dropped a wooden practice sword. She looked toward the gate and saw a figure approaching. He was an older man, stooped slightly, wearing plain garments that had seen better days. One of her watchers on the parapets had apparently deemed him no threat. He reached the courtyard, eyes scanning the small group with something like awe. Arya approached him calmly, a hand resting near Needle's hilt. "Who are you?" she asked, voice controlled. She did not announce herself as Arya Stark. Such formalities had no place here. He bowed awkwardly. "Your watchers let me pass. My name is Jorel." He swallowed, face grimy with travel. "People speak of you. They say you train those who've nowhere else to go, that you give them a chance to fight back." Arya studied him. He was not young, not old. Possibly a farmer who had seen too many bad harvests. She sensed no malice in him. Instead, she sensed desperation and a flicker of resolve. "I don't take many," she replied carefully. "What do you want?" He clenched his jaw, took a breath, and confessed. His wife and children had been slaughtered by bandits in the Riverlands. The local lord had done nothing, preferring to protect trade roads near the bigger towns, leaving smaller folk to fend for themselves. Jorel had no illusions he could get justice. Yet rumor said that in this ruined keep near the coast, a secret group was being formed dedicated to leveling the scales. He did not ask to become an assassin. He only wanted the power to set things right. Arya listened without displaying emotion. A half-dozen watchers around the yard also listened, eyes flicking her way, waiting for her judgment. At length she said, "I will teach you how to defend yourself. I will teach you how to kill if you must. But it's not vengeance I offer, only a chance. If you stay, you abide by my rules." She gazed at him, unblinking. "What you learn here is not for wanton killing. It's meant to guard the realm from the shadows. Can you accept that?" He bowed his head. "I can." So she allowed him to join. He was clumsy at first, but his grief honed an edge of determination. She saw it in his eyes whenever he practiced. At night, he stared at the flames of the cooking fire, lost in memories of the family he had lost. She never promised him retribution, but she gave him a path. Over time, Jorel improved, forging new bonds with others who had equally tragic stories. A small fellowship took shape among those who had come to the keep with heartbreak in their past, and Arya saw that their pain might become something else if guided properly, a force that could protect others from suffering the same fate. As the first year turned into the second, the keep's numbers grew enough that they needed more supplies. Arya began to send out small groups with coin that they had earned from discreet tasks. Sometimes they would remove a threat in a border region. Sometimes they would guard travelers in secret. She was careful not to become mercenaries, but coin was a necessity. The realm might have had a new peace, but in many places, chaos still lurked. She ensured that none of her people openly flaunted their affiliation. They traveled under the guise of merchants, tinkers, wandering cells, words, anything that would not draw too much attention. Meanwhile, in the keep, she established a code, unwritten yet understood by all: harm not the innocent, remain loyal to your brothers and sisters here, and never let personal greed corrupt the purpose. One day, an unexpected visitor arrived, Gendry, Lord Baratheon of Storm's End, though Arya still remembered him as the blacksmith's apprentice, the boy who had traveled with her and taken up arms during the Great War. He came with a small retinue and escort of 4 knights. The watchers on the walls nearly loosed arrows before Arya recognized him. They let him pass. When he strode into the courtyard, he bore the look of a man burdened by responsibilities. He removed his helm, showing sweat-damp hair, and fixed Arya with a curious gaze. She dismissed the watchers, leaving only herself and Gendry among the battered stone arches. They studied each other. She saw hints of the boy she had known, but his shoulders were broader, his face marked by lines of worry. He stared at her as if uncertain how to greet her. At last he said, "I wasn't sure if the rumors were true. People speak of an assassin's school on the coast, run by a woman who might be you." She shrugged, glancing at a broken statue near the courtyard's edge. "They say many things." Gendry exhaled softly, shifting on his feet. "It's good to see you. I've thought about you often." She had no words for that, not immediately. Her life was far removed from any normal path of marriage or court. She had run from such things, uncertain of her place. But she remembered the days when they had been close, 2 youths forging a bond amid chaos. "How is Storm's End?" she asked. He explained that it was not easy to be a lord. He was learning day by day, often making mistakes, but he was trying to do right by his people. Storm's End was stable enough, yet the realm's tensions weighed on everyone. He had come here because he heard talk of a new, shadowy threat. Some said Arya had become a threat herself. He did not believe it, but he wanted to see for himself. "Why, Arya?" he asked quietly, searching her eyes. "Why do this?" She paused, resting a hand against the cold stone of the keep's wall. She gazed at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, the worry for her. "Westeros is never safe for long," she said. "We both know that. The lords might have their armies, but armies are slow and often blind. There are evils you can't fight with 1,000 knights in shining armor. I learned that the hard way." Memories of the Night King, of the Bolton cruelty, of Cersei's cunning, all flickered across her mind. "I'm giving these people a chance. People like me who had nowhere to go and no one to protect them. Maybe one day, they'll protect this land in ways an army never could." He absorbed that, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow. "Are you training them to kill lords? To topple the crown?" She laughed, but it was a laugh without humor. "If a lord threatens the peace of the land or preys on the innocent, yes, we might kill him. But toppling the crown isn't my goal. I've had enough of wars. My father believed in justice, and look what it cost him. That doesn't mean we stop trying. This is my way." He nodded slowly, then asked if she could be swayed to Storm's End, to use her talents there and protect his lands. She shook her head, explaining that her place was with those who needed her. "I'm not a lady, Gendry." She smiled faintly, sadness in her eyes. "You know that." He almost looked ready to protest, but his gaze shifted to the group of watchers standing beyond the pillars, each of them silent, protective, as though Arya were the center of their hidden world. He recognized, perhaps, that she had found a purpose that didn't fit the comfortable mold of a lady or a wife. After a time, he simply nodded. "If you need anything, if trouble finds you, send word to Storm's End. And if I can keep the rumors about you from turning ugly, I will." She thanked him. They parted on awkward but affectionate terms. When his retinue rode away, the watchers returned. A few asked who he was, and she told them only that he was an old friend, a loyal one. She did not share more, and they asked no further questions. Nevertheless, Gendry's visit marked a turning point. Through him, word reached certain high-born ears that Arya Stark was not building an army for conquest, but forging a silent order meant to guard the realm from unseen threats. Some lords approved, remembering the heroism of the Stark name. Others saw it as a potential danger, a private network of killers beholden to no crown. In the north, Sansa Stark, queen in the north, if the rumors were correct, heard of Arya's activities. Arya sometimes received ravens from Winterfell, short notes from Sansa reminding Arya that she had a home if she ever chose to return. They were never condemning, never harsh, just gentle. That was Sansa's way now, a wise and tempered queen in her own domain. Arya never replied with more than a sentence or two, always politely declining to come back. She was not ready to stand as Lady Stark or any such title. Her life was here, in the shadows, guiding those who walked the same uncertain path she had once stumbled upon. As months turned into years, the keep thrived, though it remained humble. Repairs made it more defensible, more hidden. A labyrinth of tunnels in the cliffs served as training grounds for infiltration. A library of stolen or purchased tomes taught some of the younger ones how to read and write, how to track movements on a map, how to decipher codes. Arya insisted on that. An assassin who could not read was at a disadvantage. Every skill might one day be crucial. She cultivated a handful of older trainees who showed particular skill in leadership, teaching them advanced lessons in strategy, subtlety, and diplomacy. She was building, in essence, a new kind of guild, though it was not recognized by any kingdom or city. She did not name it, nor did she name herself its leader. People simply turned to her with respect, calling her the Wolf or the Ghost of the Keep, depending on the person. From time to time, they were tested. Bandits, hearing rumors of a group of orphans and runaways living in a half-ruined stronghold, imagined easy pickings. Those that came were dealt with swiftly. The watchers on the walls used arrows and cunning traps to ensure none of these threats left alive. Sometimes travelers arrived in the night, bruised and beaten by the roads or by the cruelty of men. Arya offered shelter, deciding on a case-by-case basis if they were suitable to stay. Most were. Some left after a few days, wanting only a warm meal and healing. Others remained, lured by the sense of belonging or by the mystique of learning the arts of stealth and survival. In the second winter of the keep's existence, Darren was nearly 17 and he had shown remarkable aptitude. Arya saw in him a spark of leadership. She occasionally sent him on missions to nearby towns to gather information or to protect vulnerable travelers from the shadows. His face had grown stern and there was a glint in his eyes that spoke of past sorrow. Yet he had discovered a sense of purpose in the training. One frigid night, as snow drifted down from a leaden sky, Darren stood watch on the wall near Arya. He asked her quietly about the faces. "They say you can wear the faces of others. That you learned from a temple of assassins across the sea. Is it true?" Arya hesitated, feeling the weight of that secret. She had taught them many things, but she had not fully opened the vault of the faceless men's craft. She had not taught them the ritual of wearing real faces. Part of her feared that power in the wrong hands. Part of her knew it was a dark magic, something that forever changed the one who used it. "Some skills are too dangerous," she said at last, her voice low, her breath misting the cold air. "A mask can be a physical thing. You can dye your hair, paint your face, change your clothes, alter your voice and posture. You don't need to flay another's face to become someone new." He nodded, though she sensed a flicker of disappointment. "I understand." She gave him a long look. "Darren, you and the others are learning to protect people. The faceless men serve death itself. They do not discriminate between the guilty and the innocent, so long as the coin is paid. That's not our way. Our faces are our own, but we can still be many things in the eyes of the world." He seemed to accept that answer, returning his gaze to the moonlit sea. But Arya wondered how long such secrets would remain hidden, how long before someone became curious enough to seek out the knowledge themselves. She thought of the house of black and white, the price she had paid. She remembered the faces on the walls, the cruelty of being struck blind, of learning to lie so convincingly that she almost believed herself. She did not want that for these orphans and lost souls who followed her. She had chosen a different path, one that was still lethal and drenched in shadows, but tempered by a sense of honor. It was sometime in the third year that a crisis arose beyond their walls. Word came from the north that raiders from across the shivering sea had landed on the eastern coast, near White Harbor, sacking villages. The new monarchy in King's Landing debated sending troops, but everything moved so slowly. Letters had to be sent, alliances confirmed, supply lines arranged. Meanwhile, the people of those coastal villages suffered. Arya decided it was time to test her fledgling order in a real operation. She summoned a dozen of her most skilled, Darren, Let, Jorel, and others, and bade them prepare for travel to the north. "Do not fight them in open battle," she instructed. "Use the skills I've taught you. Strike at night. Slip into their camps. Make them fear every shadow." They left in small groups over several days to avoid suspicion. Arya herself traveled separately, disguised as a plain-clothed merchant woman. Weeks of hard journey brought them to a land of frost and howling winds. White Harbor had been partially fortified, but the smaller fishing villages to the north lay exposed. Reports said the raiders were vicious, burning homesteads, taking slaves. The Manderleys could muster some men, but they were stretched thin, and the north was vast. Arya and her group spread out, gathering information. By day, they were invisible among the common folk, offering help, learning where the raiders struck next. By night, they communicated with coded signals, meeting in deserted barns or quiet groves. Then the killing began. One raider warband made camp in an abandoned village, confident that no one would challenge them until the local lords arrived with an army. That night, a handful of Arya's silent killers slipped past the sentries, their daggers swift in the darkness. A watchman's throat was slit without a sound. Another guard was dragged behind a barn, vanishing into the black. The leader of the raiders never woke from his sleep, a knife handle protruding from his chest. By dawn, the warband was in chaos, missing half its number, uncertain how it had happened. Fear spread among them, and they fled south, leaving survivors behind. In the weeks that followed, Arya's people repeated these tactics against different groups, sowing terror among the invaders. Darren and Let executed a daring infiltration one night, posing as villagers until they reached the heart of a raider encampment. A swift arrow from Let's bow took out the leader, while Darren led a diversion that allowed local villagers to rise up, seizing weapons. The success was stunning, and as word spread, local morale soared. The quiet rumor of these masked killers who fought for the small folk became a symbol of hope. When the Manderley Knights finally arrived, they found the raiders in disarray, half of them scattered back across the sea, the rest easy prey. Afterward, Arya visited Winterfell for the first time in years. She traveled alone, stepping through the ancient gatehouse where snow coated the courtyard. Memories nearly overwhelmed her. She saw, in her mind, her father practicing archery with Bran, Sansa walking with perfect posture, her own younger self chasing cats or messing about with a wooden sword. So many faces lost to time. She found Sansa in the Great Hall, conferring with her advisors. When Sansa saw Arya, the queen's composure shattered into a moment of pure relief and familial love. The sisters embraced. Sansa's hair was streaked with silver, though she was not yet old. Worry had etched lines into her once youthful face. She drew Arya aside to talk in private, to glean what her sister had been doing all these years. Arya recounted only the broad strokes, not naming names or describing her hidden keep in detail. Sansa did not pry, but she did say, "The lords talk. Some fear what you're doing." "I don't care what they fear," Arya replied, her tone mild. "I serve the realm in my own way." Sansa weighed that. "I believe you. But do be careful. Fear makes men dangerous." Arya nodded. She had learned that lesson repeatedly in her life. But she was a Stark as well as a survivor of the House of Black and White. She understood how to navigate in the shadows. She did not stay long in Winterfell, only for a short respite. She visited the crypts, paying her respects to those buried in stone. She left quietly before dawn a few days later, returning south to her secret domain. In the following year, Darren and Let emerged as skilled leaders who began to train others. Arya entrusted them with more responsibilities, while she took a step back, observing how the group grew. They had grown from a disorganized band of orphans and wanderers to a structured network capable of small, precise strikes. They had safe houses in half a dozen towns, allies among merchant caravans, informants in the courts of minor lords. All of it was done quietly, carefully, so that no single thread led back to the keep. Yet knowledge in Westeros was rarely kept perfectly secret. Whispers spread. Arya occasionally heard that certain lords wanted her dead. Others offered large bounties for the capture of any of her agents. It was in the 5th year that the greatest test arrived. A rebellion began in the Stormlands, led by a minor branch of the Baratheon line who contested Gendry's lordship. The rebels allied with discontented lords in the Reach, forming a dangerous pact that threatened to throw the realm into yet another civil war. At first, the crown did little. King's Landing was rife with intrigue and the hand of the king was ill. Factions formed in the capital, debating how to handle the rising conflict. Meanwhile, Gendry's seat at Storm's End was under threat. He sent messages across the land, hoping to rally loyalists. Arya received one such message, carried by a wounded rider who barely made it to the keep. The letter described how Gendry's enemies were numerous and well-funded. They had hired sellswords from Essos, and they were rumored to have an assassin of their own, someone trained in black arts, though the details were murky. Gendry begged for aid, albeit humbly. He knew he had no right to ask her to risk her people, but he appealed to their old bond and the knowledge that if the rebels succeeded, chaos would spread across the realm again. Arya convened with her trusted circle. They debated whether to intervene openly. Some argued that it was not their place to choose sides in a conflict of lords. Others, especially those who had seen her rapport with Gendry, urged that they stand with him. He was a fair lord, loved by his people, and the rebels threatened to sow chaos that would harm countless small folk. Arya weighed both sides. In the end, she decided they would move not as an army to stand on the battlefield but as the deadly hand in the shadows. They traveled to the Stormlands in small cells, disguised as peasants, travelers, or minor traders. In a series of secret meetings near Storm's End, they coordinated with Gendry's loyal knights and stewards. They scouted the rebel camps, identified the leaders, and learned their patterns. Once satisfied with their intelligence, they struck. Over several nights, each rebel camp found itself plagued by silent killers who slipped past defenses. The rebel officers were targeted specifically, leaving the rank and file in disarray. Arrows from unseen bowmen took the lieutenants. Daggers in the dark ended the nights of a few crucial captains. In one instance, Darren and Let infiltrated the enemy commander's pavilion, posing as Sellsword mercenaries who had grown disillusioned with Gendry. While the commander listened, Darren kept his blade hidden beneath his cloak. Let, standing behind the commander, slid a thin needle-like dagger into the man's spine before he even realized the betrayal. They escaped into the night, leaving confusion and fear in their wake. However, the rebels were not without cunning. They had their own spies. A small group of them tracked the movements of Arya's people, eventually capturing a young scout who had only recently joined. Under torture, he revealed a route that Darren would use. On a dark, stormy night, the rebels ambushed Darren and two others. Darren fought viciously, slaying two men before a crossbow bolt caught him in the chest. One of his companions died, and the other barely escaped. By the time help arrived, Darren was gone, his body taken by the rebels as proof of their victory against the so-called Shadow Killers. Arya received the news 2 days later. The pain that struck her was like a blade through the gut. Darren had been one of her first, a child she had plucked from desperation, shaped into a formidable guardian. She felt a surge of sorrow mingled with fury. Her reaction was swift. She personally led a small team to track the rebel party that had slain Darren. Under cover of a tempest, they followed the muddy trail to a fortified barn where the rebels were holed up. The Watchers took positions on the perimeter, sniping the sentries. Arya herself slipped inside, needle in hand, moving with the silent grace that had once carried her through Braavosi halls. She found the man who had led the ambush, recognized him by the silver boar emblem on his armor. In a flash, she had him pinned against a post, needle at his throat. His eyes bulged with recognition as he saw her face. Perhaps he knew from the rumors or from the distinct steel in her gaze that she was the wolf. She did not speak, only pressed the blade deeper until he gasped. "Where's he?" she asked, voice trembling. "Where's Darren's body?" The man gurgled out that it had been left to rot in a ditch outside. Arya's fury roared to life. For a moment, she wrestled with the desire to prolong his suffering. But she had vowed not to let cruelty consume her. She would end him, swift as a shadow. She let go of all the hate swirling inside, focusing on the lethal clarity she had honed. One clean stroke. His body sagged to the floor. She closed her eyes, exhaling, remembering the faces of those she had lost. In the end, Darren's body was found, battered and left in a shallow pit. They buried him by a lone tree on a rise overlooking the Stormlands sea, performing a quiet funeral rite. Arya did not shed tears openly, but her silence was heavy with grief. The rest of her people mourned as well, many having known and respected Darren. Let, tears streaming down her face, placed a small carved wolf at the grave's foot. "He always said Lady Arya saved him," she whispered. I wish we could have saved him." The rebellion soon collapsed. With key leaders gone and morale shattered by mysterious losses, the rebel forces capitulated. Gendry's loyal forces won, and peace was tentatively restored in the Stormlands. Yet for Arya and her group, it was a harsh lesson in the price of their calling. They might save many lives, but they would also lose their own along the way. That night, as the storm winds howled outside a hidden camp, Arya sat by a flickering candle and wrote a name on a small scrap of parchment, Darren. She tucked it into a pouch near her heart, remembering how once she kept a list of those she intended to kill. Now she found herself keeping a list of those she had lost, her father, her brothers, her mother, and all who had died under her watch. When they returned to the ruined keep, victory tasted bitter. They had preserved stability, protected Gendry's claim, kept thousands from the horrors of another war, but they had lost their own. Some wondered if it was worth it if they should continue. Arya called them together in the courtyard. Dozens of faces gazed at her, from the very young to the seasoned. "We pay a price for what we do," she said quietly, her voice steady. "I won't lie to you, it's a high price. But think of those who would suffer if we turned our backs. This realm is built on many things: honor, power, and yes, sometimes cruelty. But we can be the knife that stops cruelty before it grows too large. We can be the watchers on the inside, not on a wall of ice like the Night's Watch once was, but in the very heart of the realm. We do not seek glory. Most will never know what we've done. But they will live, and that is enough." She surveyed them, letting her eyes rest on the new faces, some still unsure. "If you cannot bear it, if you wish to leave, there is no shame in that. We are not bound by blood oaths. But if you stay, I expect you to carry on Darren's spirit." A handful left in the weeks that followed, quietly departing for simpler lives. Arya did not stop them. Yet many remained, their resolve crystallized by the sacrifice. Let, especially, trained harder than ever, determined to honor her friend's memory. Jorel, older and wiser, gathered the younger recruits, mentoring them with the patience of someone who had seen too much tragedy. Arya herself became more measured in her judgments, more cautious in her operations, knowing now that each mission could cost her dear. She had no illusions left about the romance of secrecy. But she also felt something deeper than duty. She felt the pulse of the North, the wolf blood in her veins, compelling her to guard the innocent. In time, the realm recognized an uneasy peace once more. Gendry's seat was secure. The crown eventually stabilized, appointing a new hand who managed affairs with moderate competence. People spoke of Arya's group as a fable akin to the stories of the Brotherhood without banners that once roamed the Riverlands. Some believed them to be the ghosts of the war, others claimed they were a northern myth conjured by the Starks, still others insisted they were nothing but Sel's words of a new order. None knew the truth fully, not even the lords who whispered about the wolf's assassins. Meanwhile, at the keep, Arya lived among her people, forging new lessons and new protocols. She taught them empathy, reminding them that they were not monsters. She organized them into smaller cells, each trained in infiltration, reconnaissance, and precise strikes. She taught them that might did not make right, and that vengeance could blind a person's heart. Occasionally, letters came from Sansa or Gendry, or from other allies who had discovered the group's existence. Most of the time, they expressed gratitude for unseen help. Sometimes, they requested further assistance with a trouble brewing somewhere in Westeros. A slaver's ring in the Iron Islands, a brutal ex-mercenary terrorizing villagers in the Crownlands. Arya evaluated each request carefully. They were not an army for hire. They acted only if it served their ethos. But more often than not, the requests aligned with their purpose: to prevent suffering. So she sent out her people, always in small numbers, always quietly. And so the years continued. Arya watched as the younger children grew into skilled operatives. She marveled at the way they formed friendships and alliances, how some even found love among their ranks, forging bonds that had been denied to them in their previous lives. Each new generation carried the memory of the old, a cycle of teachers and students, forging a lineage of shadows that Westeros had never seen before. They were not the faceless men, nor the king's assassins, nor a mere band of rogues. They were something singular. A hidden bulwark guided by the principles of a Stark who had wandered too far and seen too much. There were moments of doubt. Arya sometimes woke in the middle of the night, hearing the phantom voices of those who had died, Syrio Farrell telling her to dance, the kindly man's cryptic instructions echoing in her ears, the silent reproach of her father's memory, wondering if he would approve of a daughter who killed in the dark. She did not have all the answers, but she persevered. The next morning, she would rise and continue training with whoever was on watch, reminding them to stay light on their feet, to remain unseen. Because to Arya, everything she had learned was meant for a singular purpose, ensuring that no one else would have to run for their life as she once did, terrified, alone, hunted by forces too large to fight. Often, the new recruits asked about the significance of the dire wolf sigil, which some had begun to paint discreetly on the inside of their bracers or their tunics. Arya never officially adopted it as the symbol of their order, but it appeared organically in homage to her name and lineage. When they asked her about House Stark, she would say only that her father had believed in justice and mercy, that her mother had believed in family and loyalty, and that she, Arya, believed in forging her own path to honor those ideals. She let them wear the dire wolf in secret if they wished. It was not a banner to wave openly but a quiet oath to protect the realm from the shadows. As the keep grew from a ruin into a silent fortress, rumors spread further. In some taverns and roadside inns, travelers would claim, after enough ale, that they had glimpsed a pack of silent youths in the night, eyes glinting like wolves, moving without sound to dispatch a group of marauders. In wealthier circles, certain ambitious lords whispered about hiring the wolf's brood for clandestine tasks. Though such attempts usually failed, the watchers who roamed the land vetted every approach, discarding entreaties that smelled of ambition or cruelty. Others tried to threaten or blackmail those they believed were connected to Arya. Those rarely lasted long. A silent arrow, a quick blade, ended the threat. The keep maintained its secrecy, its lines of communication labyrinthine. One evening, Arya stood on the old parapet, gazing out at the sea. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and crimson, reflecting off the waves. Let approach quietly, bow in hand. The archer had grown into a fierce young woman, her hair cropped short, a scar across her chin from an old skirmish. She had become one of Arya's most trusted hands. They stood in companionable silence for a while. Then Let said, "I dreamed of him last night." Arya knew she meant Darren. "What did you dream?" "He stood by the sea, calling to me. I walked toward him, but each step I took, he got further away. Then I woke." Let exhaled, her breath trembling. "Sometimes I wish we had an easier life." Arya put a hand on Let's shoulder. She remembered so many nights of her own dreams, chasing after her family's ghosts in the darkness of her mind. "I know," she murmured. "But we don't choose the times we're born into. We only choose what we do with them." She let her hand drop. "Would you leave if you could?" Let's eyes were stormy with half-held tears. She shook her head. "No. The realm needs us more than ever." Arya nodded, feeling a bittersweet pride. She turned her gaze back to the sea. The gulls cried overhead. She wondered what the morrow would bring, what new threat might rear its head. She wondered how many would die in the process of ensuring that threat never reached the weak. She wondered if, perhaps one day, the realm could truly be at peace, and her band of killers and guardians could lay down their arms for good. Until then, she would remain, forging them into a sword without glory, a hidden fang in the night. Seasons turned, and the keep's walls grew stronger under careful reconstruction. Arya's hair grayed at the temples, though her body remained lithe and dangerous, her reflexes still the result of brutal training. She no longer needed to demonstrate each technique. There were others who had mastered the lessons well enough to teach. Instead, she focused on guiding the overall purpose, on deciding when and where they intervened. Some started calling her Mother Wolf, though never to her face. She remained Arya to all who spoke with her. She sometimes smiled at the idea, for she did not see herself as a mother. Yet in a way, she was a mother to a pack of lost children who had grown into lethal guardians. There were no banners, no official decrees, no mention in the annals of history. Even so, the effects of Arya's quiet work rippled through the Seven Kingdoms. A corrupt hedge knight operating an extortion ring vanished in the night. A ring of slavers in the Stepstones found themselves betrayed by their own guards who, it turned out, were Arya's agents in disguise. A vicious sellsword company that threatened the Dornish border was dismantled piece by piece, its captains found dead in their tents. Each act prevented further tragedies, though only a select few ever understood how or why such strokes of fortune occurred. Of course, not all missions ended smoothly. Now and again, her people suffered casualties, which they mourned in private ceremonies. They maintained a quiet shrine in the keep's courtyard where a carved weirwood trunk stood in place of a heart tree, its face uncarved but faintly sorrowful. There, they placed small tokens to remember the fallen, bits of cloth or carved wooden animals, adopting a tradition from Darren's grave. Arya, whenever she placed a token, silently recited the names of those lost to keep them alive in her memories. As the years wore on, she found her thoughts drifting occasionally to Bravos, to the House of Black and White, and to the knowledge she had never fully passed on. She wondered if one day her order would require that deeper skill, true face-changing, the darkest secret of the faceless men. She weighed the cost. Perhaps it was enough that her people knew how to disguise themselves in simpler ways. Perhaps that would suffice. The rituals of the faceless men had been painful, disorienting, and her sense of self had nearly drowned in their demands. She concluded it was best left to the shadows of her own history. In quiet moments, she also thought about her siblings, about Sansa ruling the North, about Bran's mysterious path, about Jon who had gone beyond the wall and might never return. She felt a pang of longing. Sometimes she wanted to see them again, to rest her weary bones in Winterfell's safety. But every time she considered it, she remembered why she chose this road. Someone had to walk in the dark, to ensure the realm's nightmares remained at bay. And Arya Stark had always been the kind of girl who ran toward danger rather than away from it. So the keep remained a secret, though an open one to those who were determined enough. A hush existed in certain corners of Westeros. Do not hurt the small folk. The wolf's eyes are everywhere. Some believed it was just a tale to scare bandits. Others, those who had cause to fear sharp justice, dared not dismiss it so easily. So it came to be that in time, Arya's order was both feared and respected, though never officially acknowledged. It operated on the edges of society, a place for exiles, orphans, and broken souls who still believed in protecting the innocent, even if that meant living a life steeped in secrecy and violence. On a warm summer night many years into this journey, Arya sat by the sea once more, the wind teasing strands of her hair. She had survived so much. The tide whispered against the rocky shore. Somewhere in the keep behind her, new recruits were laughing quietly as they prepared to bed down for the night. Let was out on a mission. Jorel was training a group of novices in infiltration. The keep's battered tower still rose against the moonlit sky, a testament to how determination and a sense of purpose could rebuild even the most broken foundations. She closed her eyes and listened to the lullaby of the waves. She remembered her father's voice, telling her she would marry some lord, have sons who would be knights. She remembered the heartbreak of losing him, of all the darkness that followed. She remembered the kill list she once murmured every night, the names that fueled her hatred. She remembered the faces she had worn in bravos. She remembered stabbing the Night King, that moment frozen in legend. So much had changed, yet so much was the same. She was still Arya Stark, still a girl who refused to be a lady, who refused to let the world's cruelty go unchallenged. She opened her eyes. In the distance, she saw shapes gliding across the water, seabirds, perhaps, or a school of fish briefly breaking the surface. The moon's reflection rippled and danced. She took a deep breath, feeling the salt air fill her lungs. Then she stood, walking back toward the keep. In the courtyard, a few watchers stood vigilant. They nodded respectfully as she passed. She nodded back, acknowledging their presence. When she reached the tower that served as her quarters, she paused to glance at a rough-hewn table covered in maps, reports, and coded messages. Each missive represented a place in the realm where her people worked quietly to keep the peace, or where new dangers might be stirring. She felt the weight of it, but also the purpose. It was a burden, yes, but one she chose freely because it was better to shine even the faintest light in the darkness than to let the darkness rule. She ascended the steps, each footfall light. Memories drifted in and out of her mind, the house of black and white where she had to become no one to eventually find herself. Winterfell, where she was once a girl who wanted to shoot arrows and ride horses, free of constraints. King's Landing, where she had lost her father. The Riverlands, where she had hidden and run. The Hound, Gendry, Brienne, all the living and the dead who had touched her life. Now, she had become someone else entirely, a teacher of shadows, shaping a new generation of silent protectors, forging them from the battered iron of broken youth into tempered steel. At the top of the tower, she pushed open a small window. The night air flowed in, carrying the scent of ocean brine. She leaned on the sill, gazing out at the starlit sky. In her heart, she whispered a silent vow, the same vow she had made when she first returned to Westeros and found this ruined keep, to stand guard against the cruelty of lords, the folly of crowns, and the tragedies of war. To give those who had nothing a chance at life. To create a pack of lone wolves that hunted evil wherever it hid. She felt the wind brush her cheek, almost like a hand in comfort. She did not know what the future would bring. Perhaps the day would come when another great war threatened all of Westeros and her people would stand in the breach. Perhaps they would fade into legend, surviving only in whispers around tavern fires. But for now, they existed, real and resolute, training in the courtyard below, preparing for the missions that tomorrow would bring. They were the generation of assassins that Arya Stark had trained, though to simply call them assassins was to miss the nuance. They were watchers, guardians, deliverers of quiet justice. Their blades were sharp, but their hearts had not been stripped of empathy. They walked the line between vigilante and protector with carefully measured steps, guided by Arya's example. As the torchlight in the courtyard flickered, as the sea wind rattled through the broken stones, Arya turned from the window, letting the darkness of the tower envelop her. She made her way to her bed, an unadorned pallet with wool blankets. Lying down, she stared at the ceiling where an opening revealed a slice of star-filled sky. She did not sleep easily. Her mind swirled with thoughts of old faces and new threats, of the future of the pack she had built. But eventually weariness overtook her and she drifted into slumber, one hand near the dagger beneath her pillow. In her dream, she walked down a long hall of faces, but instead of the dead eyes of bravos, she saw the living eyes of those she had saved, those she had trained. She saw them turning toward her, each face smiling in gratitude. Then the hall dissolved into the courtyard of Winterfell, alive with memories of her family. Ned, Catelyn, Robb, Bran, Rickon, Sansa, Jon, they stood by the weirwood, beckoning her forward. She took a step and somewhere behind her, she heard a wolf's howl, low and haunting. In the dream, she understood it to be both a warning and a reassurance. She kept walking, determined to bridge the gap between who she had been and who she must become. When she awoke at dawn, she rose and prepared for another day of training, of quiet leadership, of letters to read, of threats to evaluate. The keep slowly came to life around her. Fires were lit, practice swords clattered, watchers returned from night patrol. And so continued the life Arya Stark had chosen, shaping the realm from its very fringes, forging a new generation of assassins who might one day stand between Westeros and the shadows that would devour it. While the rest of the world spun its web of politics and power, Arya and her silent pack endured in their hidden domain, faithful to an unwritten oath that had once propelled a young wolf across seas and battles. She had come home, at last, only to become something entirely new. And from that transformation, Westeros had gained protectors unlike any it had known before. When she awoke the next morning, the sky was just turning gray, a pale wash of color creeping over the sea. Arya sat up in her narrow bed, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She moved to the window and opened it wider, letting the salty wind rush into her chambers. The old keep was coming alive below, muffled voices, the shuffle of boots, the scrape of steel as early risers readied their weapons. She stood there a moment, absorbing the morning's chill. Then she dressed, buckling needle at her hip as always. Her hair had grown longer than she usually kept it, brushing past her shoulders in uneven waves, so she knotted it behind her neck with a bit of leather cord. Quietly, she slipped out of the tower, descending the spiral staircase into the courtyard. The gates were propped open to let the early hunting parties depart. Past the ragged portcullis, the world spread out. A narrow, winding trail that led to the shore, forests bristling with pine and oak, and further inland, a patchwork of farmland dotted with modest cottages. At this hour, the dawn's hush made everything appear painted in gradients of silver and blue. In the courtyard, a cluster of watchers practiced their footwork in silence. They paused when they saw her, but she motioned for them to continue. She walked through the broken arch that led to the old inner ward. Once it might have been a stately courtyard for feasts or tournaments, but now the ground was uneven, riddled with weeds. Several recruits had set up their own training area here. She found them grouped around Jorel, whose beard had grown bushy with age. His left eye bore a fresh bruise from a sparring match gone awry. He caught sight of Arya and offered a respectful tilt of his head. "Good morning," he said in a low voice. Arya nodded. "Busy already?" He grimaced. "The new ones arrived last night, 2 teenage boys from a mountain village. They claim they fled raiders. I'm giving them basic drills." Arya's gaze flicked to the far corner. 2 lads with sun-browned skin and ill-fitting clothes were wrestling with wooden practice swords, clearly exhausted but refusing to quit. They seemed determined, she noted, measuring their stance and will in a single glance. Jorel beckoned her aside, lowering his voice. "They said they come from deep in the mountains near an old mining outpost. Claimed that outlaws seized their village. But one of them let slip something about a gray giant. I'm not sure if they're just telling stories or if there's more to it. They're frightened, that much is plain. I told them we'd keep them safe." Arya looked toward the boys again. They had paused to catch their breath, scraping sweat from their brows. "We can send someone to scout the area. If there's a real threat, the villagers deserve help." Jorel nodded. "Yes, I'll organize that." They parted. Arya made her way around the keep, observing how the routine had grown so familiar. So many had come and gone, but the core of her purpose remained: teach them stealth, skill, and cunning to defend those who couldn't defend themselves. She did not dwell on the sorrow that lurked beneath all their eyes. The keep was a sanctuary for the broken, but it was also a place of forging. Pain turned to purpose here, or so she prayed. She encountered a small cluster of children no older than 7 or 8, giggling as they tried to mimic older fighters' movements. A wiry woman named Feth, who had once been a sailor out of the Stepstones, had volunteered to watch over the youngest recruits and teach them basic agility. She was having them balance on a low wooden beam, arms spread wide. Arya watched from a short distance, arms folded, lips quirking in a subtle smile. One of the children wobbled precariously, then tumbled into the dirt. He let out a tiny yelp, but Feth scooped him up, set him back on his feet, and urged him on again. It felt oddly domestic, this swirl of daily tasks. Arya recalled how she had once drifted with no anchor, chasing the horizon. Here, she had found something more subtle but no less important, a reason to remain, a sense of belonging to a cause. She let that feeling settle in her chest, then moved on. Let was still away on her mission now. She had gone to the Crownlands to investigate rumors of a new Sellsword band terrorizing the outlying hamlets. Arya trusted Let to handle herself, but she missed her presence. Let's archery was unmatched, and her calm, watchful manner had become a cornerstone of their order. Jorel helped fill the gap, as did a few others, but Arya still felt Let's absence like a missing piece on a chessboard. She crossed into what once had been the main hall, though its roof had partially collapsed years before. Morning light slanted through the holes, illuminating a makeshift library. Stacks of scrolls and battered books lined wooden shelves rescued from the elements. Arya had encouraged the literate among them to teach the others, and over time that spark of knowledge had caught flame. Now young and old alike were learning to read, to study maps, to record observations. It was a skill rarely afforded to orphans or runaways, yet crucial to the clandestine tasks Arya assigned. Two older recruits, a married couple named Thaemon and Kasia, greeted Arya warmly. They were once traveling performers, well-versed in languages and songs of distant lands. Now they served as something like librarians and historians, collecting stories of the realm's miseries and triumphs. They asked Arya if she wanted to review the latest dispatches from Dorne. A hush had fallen over the southernmost kingdom, but small tensions simmered. Arya shook her head politely. She would read them later. Returning to the courtyard, she decided to drill with a few advanced fighters. The day was still young, the air crisp, and she felt the restless energy that often gripped her after a night of uneasy dreams. She selected 3 of her more experienced watchers, Harren, Belna, and a tall youth called Aros. She led them to a spot where the courtyard floor was marginally even, out of the way of the new recruits. Drawing needle, she took a balanced stance. The 3 watchers circled her, fanning out like predators. Harren feinted low with a wooden practice sword. Arya tapped the strike aside with needle, pivoting on the balls of her feet to deflect Belna's thrust. Aros attempted a bold overhead chop, but Arya slipped beneath his guard, the tip of needle landing near his ribs. "Don't overcommit," she said softly, stepping back. Aros nodded, his cheeks flushing with exertion. They moved again. This time Harren attacked from the side, forcing Arya to spin and block. Then Belna lunged, her moves tight and calculated. Belna was quick, but Arya was quicker. She darted out of range, set her feet, and riposted. Belna's eyes went wide as needle's point flicked to her throat. Harren tried to exploit Arya's angle, but Arya turned smoothly, hooking Harren's practiced sword with needle's slender blade. Harren lost his grip, and the wooden sword clattered to the ground. Meanwhile, Aros attempted to grab Arya from behind, but she twisted free with an elbow jab that left him gasping. They paused, breathing hard. Arya nodded approval. "Faster than last time," she said, sheathing needle. "But your coordination slipped at the final moment. Remember that 3 attackers must act as one, or you're just 3 people stumbling over each other." Her words carried no malice, only the patience of someone who had sparred 1,000 times in 1,000 ways. Belna bowed her head. Harren retrieved his wooden sword, grinning sheepishly. Aros rubbed his side. "We'll do better," he promised. "Next time, I'll let you plan your approach," Arya replied, then waved them off to rest. She herself felt a pleasant heat in her muscles from the brief exertion. She remained in place, letting her heart slow, eyes drifting over the keep's stone walls. Once those walls had been the color of storm clouds, battered by wind and time. Now, the stones were patched in places by fresh mortar. The walls still looked ancient, but they held firm. She often felt the keep was a reflection of her, scarred and incomplete, yet steadfast. A voice called from the gate, deep and urgent. Arya glanced over to see one of their lookout scouts, a lithe woman with close-cropped hair, jogging inside with worry etched across her face. She spoke briefly to the watchers by the gate, then one of them motioned for Arya. She moved to meet the scout. "Trouble?" Arya asked. The scout, her name was Kessa, nodded, catching her breath. A man's approaching on horseback. Alone. Says he's from Storm's End carrying urgent news for you. Arya's chest tightened. Storm's End meant Gendry. Instantly, she recalled the rebellion in the Stormlands a few years before, the price they had paid in blood to protect him. Had something else happened? Where's he? Almost here, Kessa said. He's wearing Baratheon colors, though they're dusty from the road. Arya nodded. Have him brought to the main courtyard. I'll see him. Within minutes, the rider clattered in through the gate, spooking a few watchers who stepped aside warily. His horse was foam-flecked and exhausted, clearly ridden hard. The man, draped in a dirty cloak but with a small Baratheon sigil pinned to his collar, swung down from the saddle. He looked around at the watchers with wide eyes, as if seeing legends come to life. Then he saw Arya approaching and gave a stiff bow. My lady, my lord, or he stumbled, uncertain how to address her. I bring word from Lord Gendry Baratheon. Arya motioned for him to straighten. Speak. There is trouble brewing in the Stormlands. Not a rebellion, but raiders again, except these come from the sea, not from within. They fly no banner, but they've been harassing the coast, burning fishing villages, taking hostages. Lord Gendry believes they might be Ironborn or some renegade offshoot. But they're moving swiftly, disappearing before he can muster a proper force. He beseeches your aid if you are willing. He also sends this. The messenger fumbled a small seal from a pouch and handed it over. It bore the stag's head of House Baratheon, along with a personal mark that Arya recognized, Gendry's half-smudged signature in the wax. Arya gazed at the seal for a long moment. It felt like only yesterday they had helped him crush a rebellion, losing Darren in the process. And now more conflict. In Westeros, trouble never truly died, it merely went into hiding, waiting for the right moment to strike. She inhaled, letting the smell of the sea breeze mingle with the stench of the messenger's sweaty horse. I'll speak with my people, Arya said quietly. You'll have food and rest. We'll answer as soon as we can. The messenger nodded gratefully, then allowed one of the watchers to lead him to water and a stable for his horse. Arya closed her fist around the seal. Part of her wanted to refuse. She was tired of seeing her order pay a price in blood to fix the realm's endless troubles. Yet she owed Gendry a debt of loyalty, if only for the trust he had shown her. She also knew that if raiders were truly capturing hostages along the Stormlands coast, many innocents were in peril. She summoned Jorel, Daemon, Cassia, and several of her most senior watchers to a private nook inside the keep. The place had once been a lord's solar, though the roof was missing, the walls still offered enough seclusion for conversation. Standing in a loose circle, they listened as Arya relayed the messenger's news. Daemon, always one for caution, said softly, if the rumors are true, we'll face them on unfamiliar waters. The Stormlands coast is difficult to patrol, full of cliffs and hidden coves. Cassia, who had traveled widely, nodded. It does sound like Ironborn tactics, hit-and-run raids by sea. But the Iron Islands have been quiet for years, so maybe it's just a band of exiled pirates. Jorel folded his arms. Whatever they are, they're harming small folk. That alone should concern us. Arya said nothing for a moment, letting them debate. The Watchers rarely turned away from a crisis, but each operation had grown more dangerous over the years. Their reputation and the fearsome mystique that accompanied it drew bigger threats. She felt the weight of each decision more keenly now. If we go, she finally said, we do it the same way as before. Not as an army. We'll send small teams to infiltrate, gather intelligence, and strike where it hurts most. We're not there to wage war. We're there to stop these raiders, free the hostages, and vanish. Gendry's men can handle the rest. They agreed readily enough, though a few watchers shifted uneasily at the thought of another mission in the Stormlands. Arya understood. Memories of the last mission lingered, Darren's death foremost among them. Still, no one openly objected. Helping the vulnerable was the reason they existed. Before they dispersed, Jorel cleared his throat. We should reach out to Led as well. She's in the Crownlands, which isn't far from the Stormlands. If she can rally a small group to meet us there, it'll strengthen our presence. Arya nodded. Send a raven to our Crownlands safe house. If Let's there, she'll get the message soon enough. And so, within days, the keep buzzed with preparations for another covert journey. Arya carefully chose who would go. She wanted a balance of experience and fresh blood, ensuring that her best watchers wouldn't be all in one place if something went awry. Jorel would remain behind to manage the keep's safety and train new recruits. Arya herself would lead the Stormlands mission. She handpicked half a dozen watchers to accompany her. Harren, Belna, Aros, Kessa the scout, and two older veterans named Dina and Naren. They departed at dawn, slipping out of the keep in pairs, blending with the coastal roads like travelers or merchants. Arya rode with Heron, leading a pair of shaggy horses they had purchased from a local stable that asked no questions. Both wore plain, nondescript cloaks. From a distance, they might appear as a brother and sister on a journey or a farmer and his wife heading to market. They planned to regroup at a small fishing hamlet near Storm's End in about 10 days, each pair taking different routes to minimize suspicion. Arya and Heron rode mostly in silence. He was a man of few words, middle-aged, with a gentle face and iron in his spine. She had watched him improve steadily in the last couple of years, though he rarely boasted. As they traveled, the countryside opened before them, rolling hills, scattered villages, fields of barley and wheat shimmering under the summer sun. At roadside inns, they paid in coin or offered quick chores to secure lodging, always maintaining a humble facade. On the third night, they camped near a stream under a half-moon sky. Heron dozed off first, leaving Arya on watch. She stared into the night, remembering old journeys, fleeing King's Landing after her father's death, wandering with the Hound, crossing the narrow sea to Bravos. Her life had been shaped by perpetual motion. Even now, with a base of operations, she found herself drifting back onto the roads at the slightest call of duty. She wondered if, deep down, she would ever be truly content to remain in one place. Some nights she thought of the House of Black and White, of the silence that had once consumed her identity. A lesser portion of her mind whispered that it might be easier to vanish back into no one, to relinquish these burdens of leadership. But she couldn't. She was Arya Stark, from the north, from Winterfell, from the blood of wolves. She had made her choice. They pressed on. The further south they rode, the thicker the humidity became. By the time they reached the Stormlands, storms had begun rolling in off the coast, pounding the land with rain. They arrived at the designated fishing hamlet by nightfall, hoods drawn against the deluge. A low cluster of huts perched near a natural harbor, faint lantern light flickering at windows. Arya and Heron dismounted quietly. A stable boy huddled under a leaky roof, wide-eyed at strangers arriving in such a storm. Heron tossed him a coin, and the boy hurried to take the horses. They headed for the hamlet's lone inn, a squat building with smoke rising from its chimney. Inside, the common room was snug but worn, the floor sticky with old spills. A few locals nursed tankards of ale, glancing up at the newcomers with half-lidded suspicion. Arya kept her hood low. Heron did the talking, asking about a pair of traveling companions who might have arrived earlier. The innkeeper, a heavy-set woman, shrugged but let them rent a room for the night. As they settled, Arya scanned the faces in the common room. No watchers from her order were visible. She wasn't surprised they would not reveal themselves so openly. She and Heron took bowls of thin stew to a corner table, quietly observing. The storm raged outside, wind rattling the shutters. The few locals drank in tense silence. One eventually spoke up to the innkeeper about missing relatives taken by pirates, but the innkeeper hushed him. Arya's interest peaked. After finishing their stew, they retreated to a cramped room upstairs. The walls were damp and the single narrow window looked out onto a dark alley. Heron rubbed at his short beard, exhaling wearily. "We should check the harbor in the morning," he said. "See if Kessa or the others arrived." Arya sat on the edge of the straw mattress, listening to the rain hammer the roof. "Yes," she agreed. "If they're not here tomorrow, we head to Storm's End alone. We can't wait too long." Heron nodded. He stretched out a blanket on the floor, insisting Arya take the bed. She didn't argue. As she curled up, hands resting near Needle, she thought of Gendry. She pictured him pacing in some cold hall, waiting for help or rallying the few men he could spare to guard the coastline. She hoped for his sake that these raids were just a fleeting menace, but experience told her otherwise. Dawn arrived soaked and dismal. The storm had barely abated. Arya and Heron ventured downstairs, stepping around puddles where the roof leaked. The innkeeper doled out a breakfast of stale bread and salted fish. Outside, the wind whipped their cloaks. They trudged toward the harbor, scanning for any sign of their fellow watchers. The docks were a sorry sight, a few fishing boats listing at their moorings, battered by the waves. Fishermen cursed the foul weather. No sign of watchers among them. Arya was turning to leave when a voice hissed her name, quiet, urgent. She spun to see Dina crouched under a canopy by a netmender's stall. Dina was a lean woman with sharp eyes, older than Arya by a good margin. Arya gave a subtle nod and she and Heron moved to join Dina under the canopy. "Where are the others?" Arya asked softly. "Close by," Dina answered. "There's a half-ruined shed at the far end of the docks. Kessa's there, along with Belna and Aros. Naren hasn't arrived yet, but we're hoping soon. We've been watching the harbor traffic. There's a supply ship that sails up and down the coast, rumored to bring contraband. We suspect it's connected to the raiders." Arya absorbed the information quickly. Let's gather and plan. This rain might conceal us. They slipped along the pier, heads bowed, pretending to check boat lines as thunder rumbled overhead. Soon they reached the shed, little more than 4 walls and half a roof. Inside, Belna and Aros waited, along with Kessa, who had a coil of rope slung over one shoulder. They greeted Arya and Heron with relief, updating them on what they'd learned over the past 2 days. The raiders were indeed striking up and down the coast, kidnapping people, looting storehouses. They seemed to know the local waters too well. Some whisperers claimed the raiders had an informant at Storm's End or among Gendry's retinue, helping them avoid patrols. Arya frowned. Any sign of how to locate them? Kessa shook her head. No fixed base that we can find. They come in fast ships, vanish quickly. The supply ship Dina mentioned might be a clue. It's called the Craven Maiden, ironically. Possibly it's ferrying goods or messages from port to port. We suspect the crew might be acting as eyes for the raiders. Arya thought about it, eyes flicking to Belna. Any sense if Storm's End itself is compromised? Belna shrugged. We haven't gone that far yet. We wanted to wait for you. They decided on a plan. A small group would sail on the Craven Maiden if possible, or at least tail it, to see where it led. Another group would proceed to Storm's End, deliver themselves to Gendry's steward, and glean more intelligence. If there truly was an informant within Gendry's circle, they needed to uncover it. Dina, you and Kessa track the Craven Maiden, Arya said. Heron, Belna, and Aros, come with me. We'll go to Storm's End. If Naren shows, direct him to follow us. Otherwise, assume he got delayed. They split soon after, Dina and Kessa taking on sailors' disguises, loose trousers, salt-stained boots, rough-spun shirts. Arya entrusted them with a small pouch of silver to bribe their way onto the Craven Maiden if the chance arose. Meanwhile, Arya and her 3 companions quietly rented 2 small rowboats from a local fisherman who asked no questions, paying with coin. Rather than travel by road to Storm's End in the open, they planned to slip around the headland by water, hugging the coastline. The fisherman eyed them doubtfully, pointing at the stormy sea, but Arya insisted. Speed and stealth mattered now. The next hours were grueling. They rowed against choppy waves, the rain lashing their faces. Belna took a turn at the oars, her biceps straining. Aros steadied the second boat. Arya peered ahead, trying to make out the silhouette of Storm's End's massive walls through sheets of rain. The ancient fortress loomed eventually, perched on a cliff overlooking tumultuous waters. By twilight, they reached a small cove sheltered by a rocky promontory. Waves smashed the rocks, sending up white plumes of spray. They beached the rowboats as best they could, dragging them onto gravelly sand. Each watcher was soaked to the bone, weary but determined. They found a narrow pathway leading up the cliffside, one that local fishermen likely used. Step by step, they climbed. The drizzle eased, leaving a thin mist in the air. Halfway up, Heron halted, pointing at a shape on the path ahead. The watchers froze, hands drifting to their weapons. But the figure was just an old man in a heavy cloak, dragging a crate on a makeshift sled. He let out a startled yelp on seeing them. Arya quickly reassured him in a calm voice, telling him they were travelers seeking shelter in Storm's End. The old man eyed them warily, muttered something about pirates, but eventually told them they could find a side entrance near the southwestern gate. Then he scurried past, hunched over, disappearing into the mist. Arya pressed on. The path widened near the fortress's outer walls. Storm's End was, as she recalled, a colossal curtain of stone, thick enough to resist any siege. She couldn't help but remember the last time she'd been here, in the aftermath of Darren's death, meeting Gendry with sorrow in her heart. Now she felt a pang of anxiety. She had come to help again, but the realm seemed determined never to let her rest. By nightfall, they reached the southwestern gate. A pair of guards in Baratheon livery stood watch, lanterns illuminating the drizzle. Arya kept her hood drawn low, but she stepped forward, speaking with quiet authority. We've come at the request of Lord Gendry Baratheon. Show him the seal. She handed them the wax impression. The guards exchanged glances. One left to fetch a superior. After a tense wait, a steward arrived, a balding man with sharp eyes. He examined the seal, then frowned at Arya. Lord Gendry did indeed send for help, but he didn't say from whom. Arya lifted her chin. He'll want to see us. The steward deliberated a moment, then sighed. Come in, but keep your weapons sheathed. We've enough trouble as it is. They were ushered into Storm's End's courtyard. Rain dripped from gargoyles overhead and the torches on the walls sputtered in the damp wind. Soldiers moved about, some carrying pikes, others hauling crates of supplies. A stable boy took their horses. Well, they had none, so the boy merely looked puzzled. The steward led them across the yard, into the grand keep that formed the fortress's heart. Gendry was in the hall, a space of sturdy architecture with thick pillars and a vaulted ceiling. He stood at a wooden table strewn with maps, conferring with several knights and captains. When Arya entered, he glanced up, and his eyes widened. For a moment, the tension in his face fell away. She recognized the flicker of relief, and maybe something warmer, though he hid it quickly among his men. He dismissed the knights with a curt nod, leaving only one older captain at his side. Then he stepped toward Arya. She and her watchers removed their hoods, letting the torchlight reveal their features. Gendry took in their soaked cloaks, the exhaustion etched in their eyes. His gaze landed on Arya, lingering with a mix of gratitude and worry. "You came," he said softly. Arya nodded. "You asked." A ghost of a smile tugged at his lips, but the seriousness of the situation soon reasserted itself. He glanced at her companions, Harren, Belna, Aros, offering them a respectful nod. "You're all welcome here." He led them to the table where candlelight revealed a large map of the Stormlands coastline. Inked marks indicated recent raids, villages attacked, and probable routes of the raiders' ships. Gendry pointed at a cluster of them. Arcs near the southwestern shore, less than a day's sail away. They've taken nearly a dozen hostages. Fisherfolk mostly. A few children. We found traces of them in sea caves, but by the time my men arrived, the raiders were gone. Arya leaned over the map. "Have you discovered who leads them?" He shook his head. "No. Some say they're Ironborn, but I've also heard claims they're outlaws from Essos. Rumors vary. My best guess is they're a mixed crew of pirates. They're cunning, though always a step ahead. I suspect a spy in my ranks, but I can't prove it." Arya glanced at Harren and Belna. They shared a knowing look. A spy would align with the intelligence they'd received. She turned back to Gendry. "We'll find them. We've split our people. Some are tailing a suspicious vessel, the Craven Maiden, which might coordinate the raids. If that leads nowhere, we'll still do what we do best, strike from the shadows." Gendry nodded, relief in his eyes. "Thank you. My men are exhausted, demoralized. It's hard to fight an enemy that never stands in open battle." Arya felt a pang, recalling the Great War against the dead all those years ago. She understood the frustration of having no direct target. She reached out and touched the map, tracing the coastline. "We'll need a place to operate from. Here inside Storm's End, the spy might watch us." He tapped a spot inland, a small forested region near the coast. "There's an old watchtower, half-ruined, that no one uses anymore. You could base yourselves there. I'll provide supplies quietly." Arya liked that plan. "All right. We'll rest here tonight, then move at first light." She glanced at him, noticing the tension in his broad shoulders. "How are you faring?" He gave a rueful snort. "Better now that you're here." Then he coughed, awkwardly adding, "Better knowing there's some hope." She didn't linger on his slip of the tongue. Instead, she said, "We'll solve this, Gendry." He nodded, but uncertainty lingered in his gaze. "I hope so. They're ruthless, Arya. They don't just kidnap, they kill anyone who resists. I've seen what they leave behind." Arya recalled the horrors she'd witnessed over the years, the destruction, the cruelty. She steeled herself. "We won't let them continue." He showed them to a side chamber where they could dry off and rest. A servant brought blankets and bread. Arya removed her wet cloak, mindful of Needle's weight at her hip. Harren, Belna, and Aros settled wearily on benches, devouring the bread and sipping ale. When Gendry left to attend other duties, Arya's companions eyed her with curiosity. Belna finally asked, "How did you come to know Lord Gendry? He seems very glad to see you." Arya shrugged, not meeting Belna's gaze. "We traveled together during the wars. He's a good man." She offered no further details. There was an unspoken understanding among her watchers not to pry too deeply into her personal history. She was, after all, their leader, but also an enigma in many ways. They spent the night in shifts, for even here in Gendry's hall, they never let their guard down completely. Morning arrived with a feeble sun piercing through thick clouds. Rain still threatened, but for the time being, it held off. A stable hand provided them with 4 horses, courtesy of Gendry's promise. They departed through a smaller postern gate at dawn, heading for the old watchtower. The countryside rolled by, damp fields and rugged hills, until they found the tower, a crumbling structure of stone perched atop a rise overlooking the sea. Trees crept close on 2 sides, forming a natural barrier. The place was deserted, the lower floor strewn with debris. A narrow staircase wound up to a half-collapsed upper chamber which offered a decent view of the coastline. They spent the day clearing out rubble, setting up a modest camp. Aros climbed to the top of the tower to watch the sea. Harren and Belna mapped the surrounding terrain, noting footpaths and potential vantage points. Arya directed them with quiet efficiency, her mind focused on the mission. In the late afternoon, a soft whistle from the trees drew their attention. They moved cautiously to investigate. Emerging from the brush was Naren, panting from exertion. He'd finally caught up. A stocky man with a wide grin, Naren had joined the keep's ranks 2 years prior, proving adept at infiltration. Arya was relieved to see he'd made it. He brought news. Dina and Kessa had managed to board the Craven Maiden by posing as deckhands. They'd sent a coded note via a messenger bird indicating the ship was heading westward, possibly to meet the raider fleet. Arya considered that. Good. If they can pinpoint the raider base, we'll be one step closer. Naren also reported that he'd heard talk in local taverns of a certain Lord Garland Yelshire who was scouring the Stormlands for suspicious travelers. He's a minor lord, but quite vocal. Some say he despises Gendry's claim to Storm's End. Maybe he's fueling these raids? Or maybe he's just opportunistic, wanting to curry favor in King's Landing by capturing outlaws. Arya's expression hardened. We'll keep an eye on him. If he's aligned with the raiders, we'll find proof. For the next 2 days, they scouted the coastline. They moved in pairs, disguised as wanderers or even potential victims, hoping to lure out raider scouts. But the region felt eerily deserted. The few villagers they encountered spoke in hushed tones, warning that the sea was haunted by ships bearing black sails. Arya stored every detail, every rumor. At night, they returned to the tower where they took turns on watch, scanning the dark horizon for any sign of Dina and Kessa's return. On the morning of the 3rd day, a rider arrived with supplies from Storm's End, dried meat, fresh water, a message from Gendry. The message stated that 2 more villages had been raided, no survivors found. The rider described a grim scene, burned huts, bodies half buried in rubble. Arya's watchers exchanged somber looks. She clenched her jaw, recalling too many such sights in her life. We have to act soon, Harren said. Arya agreed. We will. Once Dina and Kessa return with a lead, we'll strike. But Dina and Kessa did not return that day, nor the next. On the 5th night, with tension high, Arya couldn't sleep. She climbed to the top of the tower where Belna stood watch. The sky was overcast, swallowing the moon. An oil lantern flickered at the crenellated edge, casting trembling light on Belna's face. She looked worried. Arya joined her, leaning on the parapet. The wind carried the taste of salt and the hollow rush of distant waves. Anything? Arya asked. Belna shook her head. Nothing but darkness. They listened to the ocean in silence. Arya felt frustration brewing within her. Every hour that passed meant more villagers in danger, more potential raids. Dina and Kessa were capable, but if they'd been discovered aboard the Craven Maiden, they might be in mortal peril. Belna broke the silence. If Dina and Kessa don't return soon, do we move without them? Arya exhaled. We might have to. I don't like it, but waiting too long serves no one. She rubbed the scar on her left forearm, a habit she'd picked up. We can check the sea caves ourselves, try to find clues. Belna nodded. Whatever you decide, we'll follow. Arya stared into the night, recalling the day she first taught Belna the water dance, correcting her footwork, urging her to keep her weight balanced. Belna had grown into a formidable fighter, though still overshadowed by Arya's own skill. Arya felt a flicker of gratitude for loyal companions. As she turned to go, a new sound emerged through the wind, the faint clang of metal striking stone. Both women froze. Arya's ears strained. The sound repeated, distant but distinct. She motioned for Belna to douse the lantern. Darkness swallowed them. The clang came again. Arya realized it came from somewhere near the base of the tower. They hurried down the narrow stairs. In the tower's entryway, they found Naren and Aros already alert. Harren was outside, blade drawn, scanning the area. Arya signaled them to move silently. She and Belna slipped through the crooked doorway. The night was nearly black, but their eyes adjusted. Over there, Harren whispered, pointing toward a rocky outcrop near the tower's base. Arya crept closer, hearing the faint moans of someone in pain. She raised her torch but kept the flame partially shuttered with her hand. A figure lay slumped against the stones, clothes torn, arms pinned behind them by a length of chain. Blood matted their hair. Arya's pulse quickened. She recognized the curve of the figure's jaw. It was Dina. She was alive but battered. With swift caution, Harren and Arya unlatched the chain, letting Dina slump into their arms. She let out a gasping cough, eyes fluttering. "Hey Arya," she whispered. "We have you," Arya murmured, pulling her into the tower. Naren fetched water and bandages. By the light of a small lantern inside, they saw the extent of Dina's injuries: bruised ribs, a cut across her temple, a nasty burn on her forearm. She trembled uncontrollably. "What happened?" Arya asked, voice low and urgent. Dina's gaze unfocused, then locked onto Arya as if she were a lifeline. "They discovered us on the ship. We got close, so close, to finding the raider fleet. Kessa was. She told me to jump overboard, to swim, that she'd distract them." Dina choked on a sob. "I was captured before I could get away. They tortured me. They wanted to know how many of us there were. I played dumb, but they decided to make an example of me. They left me for dead near the water. I crawled. Managed to reach here." Arya's heart twisted. "Kessa? Did she escape?" Dina shook her head miserably. "I don't know. She was fighting them when I last saw. They might have taken her." Arya closed her eyes briefly, forcing down the surge of anger. "Who are they?" she asked. "Did you learn anything?" Dina swallowed. "They're led by a man called the Sea Scorpion. Some ex-Ironborn, maybe, but he's gathered fighters from all over Essos, slavers, pirates, sells words. They do deals with wealthy lords in Westeros who want trouble zone. The Craven Maiden was meeting them to deliver weapons and new recruits. Kessa and we got discovered before we could see the entire fleet, but it's anchored somewhere along the southwestern shore, caves, hidden coves." Arya pressed a hand gently to Dina's uninjured shoulder. "We'll find them. You're safe now." Dina's eyes brimmed with tears. She nodded shakily. "I'm sorry. I should have been more careful." "You did well," Arya said fiercely. "You survived. That's all that matters." Harren and Naren helped Dina to a small pallet, dressing her wounds. Arya stepped aside, mind racing. The Sea Scorpion. A figure forging alliances in the shadows, collecting cutthroats and traitors. Possibly hired or encouraged by certain lords who resented Gendry or the stability of the throne. She had to move, and fast. They had no time to lose if Kessa was still alive. She turned to her watchers. "Tomorrow at first light, we strike. We'll search the coast for these caves. The raiders are bold enough that they might be operating from the biggest network of sea caverns. Belna, you're with me. Naren, you and Aros search from the east. Harren, you stay here with Dina. She needs rest and protection." Harren's brow furrowed. "I'd rather fight with you." Arya gave him a tight smile. "I know. But Dina needs a guard, and someone must hold this tower in case Gendry sends word. I trust you more than anyone, Harren." He reluctantly agreed, though frustration simmered in his eyes. Arya understood. He wanted to avenge Dina's torment, perhaps also to spare others the same fate. But they had to divide their forces wisely. Morning came, cold and drizzly again. Arya and Belna set out on horseback to the west, while Naren and Aros took a separate route east. The coastline in this region was rugged. Steep cliffs, hidden inlets, the occasional pebble beach. The stormy weather made the water a churning gray mass below. Arya and Belna kept off the main roads, guiding their horses carefully along half-overgrown trails. By mid-afternoon, they found a lonely stretch of shore where the cliffs formed a crescent around a small bay. The tide had receded, revealing jagged rocks and dark openings in the cliff face. Arya dismounted, tying her horse to a stunted tree. Belna followed suit. "Looks promising," Belna muttered, scanning the cliffs. Arya crouched, examining footprints in the damp sand. "These tracks are fresh," she noted, pointing at what looked like multiple boot prints. "And see here, there's a path leading to that larger cave." They approached quietly, sticking to the shadows of the cliff. The entrance of the cave yawned before them, wide enough for a decent-sized boat. The scent of salt and seaweed wafted out, mixed with something more pungent. Unwashed bodies, perhaps. Arya's heart thumped. If the raiders were indeed inside, they might have lookouts posted. She motioned for Belna to proceed with caution. They slipped in, the darkness enveloping them. Water dripped from stalactites, forming puddles. Further in, dim torchlight flickered off wet walls. Arya flattened herself against the slick stone, creeping forward on silent feet. Belna followed, her breath a barely audible hiss. Voices echoed from deeper in the cave. Arya paused behind a natural column, peering around. She glimpsed a small cove within the cavern where 2 longboats were beached, each bearing black sails. Barrels were stacked nearby, presumably containing provisions or stolen goods. She counted 6 or 7 men moving about, all armed. One man with a black serpent tattoo winding across his neck seemed to be directing them. His stance exuded authority, but she couldn't tell if he was the sea scorpion or a lieutenant. He barked orders about unloading crates. Arya listened intently, picking out scattered words about the scorpion returning soon and keeping watch for any of the Baratheon dogs. So their leader wasn't present at the moment. Quietly, Arya beckoned for Belna to retreat a few steps. A direct assault on 7 armed men in their own lair was risky, especially if more lurked deeper. They slipped back toward the entrance, breathing carefully. Once out of earshot, Arya leaned close to Belna. "They might have prisoners here," she whispered. "We need to confirm." Belna nodded, eyes flicking to the side. "I saw a passage branching off near the right. Maybe that leads to a holding area." They decided to circle around, hugging the walls to see if they could find any captives and Kessa if she was among them. Step by excruciating step, they snuck back inside, this time taking a path that curved away from the main cove. The darkness pressed in. Belna felt her way along the wall while Arya kept one hand on needle ready for any guard. Eventually, they spied a faint glow of torchlight ahead. The corridor opened into a smaller chamber. Arya and Belna crouched behind rocks. Inside, they saw a makeshift pen formed by wooden stakes hammered into the cave floor. People huddled behind the stakes, men, women, even children, all with terrified, hollow expressions. A single guard stood watch, leaning lazily on a spear. Arya counted at least 10 captives. Her heart clenched to see 2 small children clinging to each other, wide-eyed. She scanned the captives for Kessa's face, but didn't spot her among them. That meant Kessa was either elsewhere or... She pushed the thought aside, focusing on the immediate problem. One guard was manageable, but if the captives made noise, others in the cove might rush in. Arya tapped Belna's shoulder, gesturing for a stealthy approach. They waited until the guard turned, scratching at a scab on his neck. Then Arya darted forward. Needle flashed in the torchlight. She clamped a hand over the guard's mouth, driving the blade into his throat. A muffled gurgle, a spurt of blood, and he sagged. Arya eased him down to avoid a thump. Belna hurried to the pen, whispering, "Quiet! We're here to free you." The captives stared in disbelief. One older woman whispered, "Who are you?" Arya slipped the ring of keys from the dead guard's belt, testing them on the crude padlock. "Friends," she muttered. The lock gave way with a rusty click. Belna carefully removed the stakes to make enough room for the captives to squeeze out. "Please hurry," Arya said softly. She cast a glance back toward the corridor. They had precious little time before someone noticed the missing guard. The captives crawled out one by one, trembling. Belna helped the children, pressing a finger to her lips to keep them silent. Arya scanned them, still not seeing Kessa. Her gut clenched in worry. She turned to a middle-aged man whose left arm was bandaged with filthy rags. "Have you seen a woman with short hair, scar on her cheek, might have arrived recently?" The man shook his head. "Not here." Arya bit her lip. She nodded toward Belna. "Get them outside quickly. I'll check the rest of the tunnels." Belna's eyes widened. "You can't go alone." "We have no choice," Arya hissed. "We can't risk these people being recaptured. You lead them out, wait near the horses. If I'm not back in a short while, leave. Understand?" Belna hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. She began guiding the captives along the corridor, footsteps shuffling in near silence. Arya faced the darkness ahead, checking the dying guard to see if he had anything else of use. She found a short dagger which she pocketed. Then she moved deeper into the cave, ignoring the chill seeping through her damp clothes. Her senses sharpened, every muscle poised for violence. She passed smaller alcoves littered with crates, presumably stolen goods. Voices echoed from the main cove, men still busy unloading. She avoided that route, following a narrower passage that sloped downward. The air grew stale, tinged with the stench of rot. At the bottom, a wooden door barred her path. It stood partially ajar, candlelight flickering beyond. She crouched, peering through the gap. The chamber beyond was small, containing a rough table with instruments of torture, pincers, knives, a branding iron. Anger flared in Arya's chest. Against the wall, a body lay slumped, chained at the wrists. The face was bruised and swollen, hair caked with dried blood. Arya's stomach churned. It was Kessa. She wasn't moving. Fear spiked in Arya's veins. In 2 quick steps, she was inside the room, ignoring the possibility of a guard. She reached Kessa's side, pressed 2 fingers to her neck. A faint pulse fluttered there. Relief and dread collided. Kessa stirred, letting out a whimper of pain as Arya tried to lift her head. One of her eyes was swollen shut, and bruises covered her bare arms. "Kessa," Arya whispered. "It's me. Stay quiet." Kessa coughed, spitting blood. Her good eye fluttered open. Recognition flickered. Then tears welled. "Arya, I tried." "Shoo," Arya murmured. She located the key ring she'd taken earlier and tried each one on the shackles that bound Kessa's wrists to the wall. At last, a rusted key turned with a scrape, freeing her. Arya gently lowered Kessa's arms. Kessa gasped at the movement, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Her clothes were torn, her body riddled with cuts and bruises. Arya's rage seethed like a living thing. She wanted to kill every raider in this cave, but she had to get Kessa out first. Summoning her strength, Arya hoisted Kessa onto her back, hooking Kessa's arms around her shoulders. Kessa was too weak to stand on her own. Arya carried her, staggering under the W-8. Her mind raced, picturing the route they'd need to take to avoid detection. She had to get to the exit corridor. With the rest of the raiders busy in the main cove, maybe it was possible. She crept back up the sloping passage, each footstep measured to avoid splashing in puddles or scuffing the rocky floor. Kessa's ragged breathing rasped near Arya's ear. At the top, she paused, hearing footsteps approaching. She pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering. 2 raiders emerged from a side tunnel, their torch casting moving shadows. They were talking about the missing guard. Apparently they'd discovered his absence. One said he was worthless, probably out pissing again. They came closer, just a few paces away. Arya tightened her grip on Kessa, considering her options. She could attack, but with Kessa on her back, her mobility was compromised. She held her breath, flattening against the wall. The flicker of torchlight passed dangerously near. The men moved on, oblivious. Their voices faded around a bend. Arya let out a slow exhale. She continued, step by painstaking step, until she reached the corridor leading out. There was the pen on the right, now empty. The guard's corpse remained on the ground, a silent testament to Arya's infiltration. She hurried past, ignoring the blood. At the mouth of the cave, sunlight filtered in weakly, the tide having risen. She could see Belna in the distance, helping the freed captives across the slippery rocks. Arya focused, crossing the final stretch. The group waiting outside stifled gasps when they saw the shape of Kessa on Arya's back. A few of the captives moved to help, but Belna waved them on. "Keep moving," she whispered fiercely. "We're not safe yet." She rushed to Arya's side, easing Kessa's weight. "Gods," she breathed, her eyes full of horror at Kessa's condition. Kessa let out a faint moan. Arya steadied her, face grim. "She's alive. That's all that matters. Let's go." They guided Kessa over the rocks, the cold surf swirling around their ankles. The tide was indeed coming in, soon the cave mouth would be impassable. Belna led the captives to a path leading up the cliff where they could hopefully find safety. Arya and Kessa brought up the rear, adrenaline fueling Arya's steps. Behind them, shouts echoed from the cave. The raiders had discovered the rescue. Arya glanced back to see figures racing out of the darkness, swords in hand. The Watchers had only a narrow head start. One arrow whistled past, missing them by inches. Arya cursed, ducking low. She couldn't draw a needle without dropping Kessa. "Run," Belna hissed, half carrying a child. The group scrambled up the rocky slope. The raiders spilled onto the shore, cursing the retreating tide that left them fighting slick rocks. Another arrow flew, striking a captive in the leg. The woman cried out, collapsing. Arya hesitated, torn between saving her or pushing Kessa forward. Belna reacted first, handing the child to another captive while she grabbed the wounded woman by the arm, hauling her onward. Arrows continued to whine overhead, some clattering off rocks. One man, a raider with a savage grin, bounded forward with surprising agility, closing the distance. Arya gritted her teeth. She turned, bracing Kessa against a boulder. "Belna, take her." Belna moved swiftly, letting Arya free her arms. Arya drew needle, pivoting to face the charging raider. He sneered at the sight of a slight woman with a small blade. His scimitar gleamed. He swung a powerful overhead strike. Arya sidestepped, letting the blade whoosh past. She flicked needle at his wrist, drawing blood. He howled, swung again. She ducked, slipping behind him in a graceful pivot. A single thrust, angled precisely between his ribs, ended his cry. Another raider approached, but the swirling surf slowed him. Arya seized her moment, turning to help Belna and the wounded captive scramble higher. The second raider aimed a crossbow, but his shot went wide as the ocean swelled around him. Belna and Arya locked gazes. They knew they couldn't outfight all the raiders with wounded and terrified captives in tow. Their only chance was to reach the horses. The group managed to crest the slope. The horses were tethered to sparse shrubs. The captives scattered, some collapsing from exhaustion, others sobbing in relief. Arya and Belna quickly assessed Kessa. She was conscious but fading in and out. They had only 2 horses. "Put Kessa on my horse," Arya instructed. "Let the wounded woman ride with her. Everyone else, if you can walk, will guide you away from here." Belna nodded, helping Kessa mount. The other watchers among the rescue party, well, there were none except Arya and Belna. So the 2 watchers had to guide the entire group to safety. They set off at once, urging the captives to keep moving. The raiders didn't chase them up the cliff. Apparently the precarious terrain, plus the watchers' lethal skill, had discouraged immediate pursuit. Still, Arya knew they would regroup, possibly sending out a larger party. They marched inland, forging a path through a stunted forest. Eventually, the frantic pace proved too much for some of the weaker captives. They stumbled, panting. Arya paused to let them catch their breath, scanning the surroundings. The sun hung low in the west, painting the sky in muted oranges. They needed a safe place to rest. She spotted a cluster of old ruins, a few stone walls, and a partial roof nestled among the trees. It looked abandoned. She guided the group there. The structure offered minimal shelter, but it was better than open ground. They helped Kessa and the wounded captive lie on bedrolls of pine boughs. Belna tended to them, rummaging through a small pack for medicinal herbs. Arya circled the perimeter, ensuring they had no immediate pursuers. Night fell. They dared not light a fire. The children whimpered in hunger. Arya shared what little rations she carried: dried meat, stale bread. Belna tried to keep morale steady, reminding the captives they were free. Arya, for her part, remained vigilant, scanning the darkness for any sign of pursuit. She knew they couldn't linger here long. In the morning, they'd need to move again, maybe link up with Naren and Aros or return to the watchtower. She knelt beside Kessa, who had drifted into an uneasy sleep. Her breath was shallow but regular. Belna had cleaned her wounds, though some cuts looked infected. Arya touched Kessa's hand gently, feeling a surge of guilt that her watchers kept paying the price for this realm's endless strife. She whispered a vow to herself to end this sea scorpion's threat once and for all. As she stood, a faint rustle in the brush made her tense. She reached for Needle's hilt. A moment later, someone emerged, Naren and Aros, stumbling into the ruins with wide eyes. They froze, seeing the group. Arya exhaled in relief. She beckoned them over, indicating silence. Naren crouched beside Arya, whispering, "We've been searching for you. We found your tracks. Did you rescue all these people?" Arya nodded. "They were prisoners. The raiders are camped in a large sea cave west of here. Kessa was inside, tortured. Dina's back at the tower, wounded." "Where did you go?" Aros answered in hushed tones. "We found smaller raider camps, but nothing this big. We also discovered something else. Lord Yelshire was spotted meeting with suspicious figures on the road, as if he's coordinating with them." Arya's brow darkened. "So the rumors are true. He might be the local lord fueling these raids. If we can prove that," Naren grimaced, "it won't matter unless we can take down the raiders themselves. Yelshire might deny everything otherwise." Arya gazed at the pitiful cluster of freed captives huddling for warmth. She nodded. "We'll do both. We'll crush the raider base, rescue any hostages still alive, and find whatever evidence we can to implicate Yelshire. Then Gendry can strip him of lands or send him to the king in the capital for justice." Easier said than done. The cave was well defended and the Watchers had only a handful of fighters in half strength. They needed Gendry's help, perhaps a small strike force that could arrive quickly, coordinated with Arya's infiltration. If the main portion of the raiders were drawn out, Arya's Watchers could slip in, sabotage their boats, and rescue more prisoners. Then Gendry's men could corner them on land. They spent the rest of the night forming a plan. At dawn, they guided the rescued captives through the forest, taking care to avoid main roads. Some needed more care than Arya or Belna could provide, so they decided to bring them straight to Storm's End under the Watcher's protection. Kessa, still half delirious, clung to the saddle as Belna led the horse. Their journey back took the better part of the day. Once they reached the outskirts of Storm's End, Arya sent Naren ahead to arrange discreet entry. The captives were ushered through a side gate, just as they had arrived days before. Gendry's steward was waiting, his eyes widening at the sight of so many half-starved, battered villagers. Stable hands helped with Kessa, while the steward promised food, shelter, and medical attention for the rest. Word of the rescue quickly reached Gendry. He appeared in the courtyard, flanked by 2 knights. He looked as though he'd slept little, dark circles under his eyes. Yet he moved swiftly to Arya's side, scanning the group, concern etched on his face. "You found them?" he asked, voice hushed. Arya nodded. "We freed them from a sea cave. The raiders have more. Their main camp is somewhere close by, maybe more caves. Their leader's called the Sea Scorpion. They're well organized." Gendry's jaw tightened. "Bastards. I've had my men searching, but the coastline is vast." He gestured for the knights to help the rescued captives find food. Then he turned back to Arya. "We'll strike together. Tell me what you need." Arya outlined her plan, a swift, targeted assault. She and her watchers would infiltrate from the cave side again, ensuring the raiders couldn't slip away by sea. Meanwhile, Gendry's men would approach from land, blocking escape routes. If they moved fast, they might catch the Sea Scorpion off guard. Gendry agreed, though he warned that mobilizing a large force would take time and might alert the spy within his ranks. "We should keep this as quiet as possible. I'll only involve men I trust implicitly. Maybe 100 of my best, no more." Arya nodded. "The Watchers can't fight 100 men's worth of enemies, so we'll need your men to corner them once we strike from within." She paused. "Also, I suspect Lord Yelshire is behind this. He may be the one funneling information. If your men come into direct conflict with him, be ready for betrayal." Gendry's eyes narrowed. "Yelshire, that snake. He's always grumbled about my holding Storm's End. Very well. I'll keep watch on him." They decided to move at dawn the next day. Meanwhile, the rescued captives needed rest. Kessa was placed under the care of Gendry's maester, a mild-mannered man with a kindly gaze. He insisted on cleaning Kessa's wounds with wine and applying salves. Arya stood by, watching anxiously until the maester assured her Kessa would survive, though her healing would be slow. She then checked on Dina, who Gendry's steward had already brought to the keep from the watchtower. Dina was battered but stable, relieved to see Arya again. They exchanged a few quiet words. Dina apologized again for failing to uncover the raider fleet's exact location, but Arya insisted she'd done enough by surviving. Dina urged Arya to end the Sea Scorpion, pressing her hand in silent entreaty. Arya promised she would. That night, Storm's End buzzed with covert preparations. Gendry's chosen knights and men-at-arms gathered in the courtyard, equipping themselves quietly. Arya and her watchers restocked their supplies, checking ropes, grappling hooks, and small vials of sweet sleep or poison. They practiced infiltration routines in whispered sessions behind locked doors. Outside, the wind picked up as if nature itself braced for a storm of steel and blood. Arya took a moment to stand atop the walls of Storm's End, gazing at the moonlit sea. Waves raged in the distance, pale foam glowing in the dark. She thought of the times she'd fought in the shadows against the Night King, against Lannister soldiers, against the faceless men themselves. Fate had a way of leading her to these battles. Or perhaps it was her own restlessness, her refusal to let injustice stand. A familiar footstep sounded behind her. She turned to see Gendry. The torchlight illuminated his face, revealing lines of worry that had deepened over the years. He paused, meeting her gaze. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked quietly. She gave a slight shrug. "Nor you, I suspect." He leaned on the stone battlement. "No, I keep thinking about the small folk. They've already suffered so much. I don't want to fail them again." Arya studied his profile. "You're not failing them. You're doing all you can." He sighed. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm good at this lordly business. People come to me with problems, expecting me to fix everything. And then I watch these pirates, these raiders, terrorize my lands, and I feel powerless." She remembered the boy he once was, forging steel in a smithy, not a care for politics. Now he carried the weight of a noble title. She reached out, resting a hand on his forearm briefly. "You're not powerless. We'll deal with these raiders together, like we've always done." For a moment, his eyes shone with gratitude. Then he cleared his throat. Yes, we will." He hesitated, glancing over the wall. "Be careful, Arya. I can't. I don't want to lose more good people." She nodded, letting her hand drop. "You won't. Silence lingered between them, thick with unspoken memories. She recalled the day they parted ways after the Great War, how he'd offered her a future at Storm's End and she'd declined, choosing the open road. Even now, with all they'd been through, she sensed a familiar tension, a bond laced with longing, perhaps regret on both sides. But the present crisis allowed no time for such reflections. They parted, each returning to final preparations. Arya found her watchers in a side room, Belna, Harren, Naren, and Aros. They had replaced torn cloaks, sharpened weapons, checked all gear. The tension in their faces mirrored her own. "All set?" she asked. Harren nodded. "Aye. Let's finish this." Belna managed a tight smile. "We'll make them pay for what they did to our own." Naren said nothing, but his eyes flickered with grim resolve. Aros had a more nervous energy. He was younger, thirsting for victory but wary of the risks. Arya was aware that the Watchers had lost enough loved ones. She silently vowed to keep them alive if she could. Dawn broke under a slate-gray sky, thick with clouds. Gendry's small force gathered in the courtyard, 2 columns of men-at-arms in leather and mail, knights with well-forged swords. A few archers carried compact bows. Arya and her Watchers joined Gendry at the front. No trumpets sounded, no banners flew. They wanted this expedition to remain as discreet as possible until the final moment of engagement. Lord Yelshire was not present, having made some excuse about traveling north. Arya shared a meaningful look with Gendry. They both suspected Yelshire was off informing the raiders. They rode out in silence, hooves muffled against damp ground. The plan was to split in 2 columns once they reached a certain fork in the road. One column would approach from the cliff above the caves, the other from the beach below, while Arya's Watchers infiltrated from the entrance. If the sea scorpion was there, they'd trap him. The miles passed quietly. A light drizzle fell. The Watchers rode near Gendry, scanning the horizon. Eventually, they reached the place where the forest thinned, revealing rocky slopes descending to the sea. Gendry ordered the force to break into 2 groups. One would follow him along the high ground, the other, under the command of his captain, would circle down to the shore. Arya and her Watchers dismounted, leaving their horses hidden among the trees. "We'll slip in now," Arya told Gendry. "Wait for our signal. If we succeed, the raiders will come rushing out or try to flee by sea." Gendry nodded, face grim. "Good luck." She nodded back, then turned to her Watchers. "Let's go." They moved swiftly, picking their way down a narrow path toward the cave entrance. Arya's heartbeat thudded in her ears. The memory of carrying Kessa out, the fear of arrow fire, flashed through her mind. This time, the raiders wouldn't be taken by surprise so easily. But they had to try. They reached the shore. The tide was half out, revealing slippery rocks that led to the cave mouth. 2 guards stood watch. Arya signaled Harren and Belna, each drawing a throwing dagger. They let fly almost simultaneously. The daggers found their marks with lethal precision. The guards collapsed without a cry. They hurried forward, retrieving the daggers. Beyond the cave mouth, the darkness beckoned. Torches flickered inside. Arya suppressed a shiver. She remembered the layout, though the cave system might extend further. She led them in. The tension was palpable. Water dripped. Somewhere in the distance, voices muttered. A small group of raiders hurried across the main cove, carrying crates. This time, Arya's Watchers wasted no time. They descended on the raiders, weapons flashing. Harren took 2 down with brutal efficiency. Belna slashed another's throat, Aros parried a clumsy spear thrust, and Naren dispatched the man with a quick strike to the kidneys. Arya herself lunged at a pirate who fumbled for his sword, driving needle through his chest. Their presence was soon discovered. Shouts echoed and a warning horn blew, a high, keening wail that reverberated through the caverns. More raiders poured in from side passages. Arya and her Watchers found themselves beset, the clang of steel filling the air. She spun, parried a blade, ducked another. Harren blocked a club that would have caved in Arya's skull, returning the blow with a savage slash. Blood spattered the cave floor. Despite the chaos, Arya kept her head, calling out, "Split." Harren, Naren, flank left. Belna, Aros, right with me. The Watchers moved in sync, dividing the raiders' attention. The horn's echoes gradually died, replaced by the roars of furious men locked in combat. A handful of raiders broke away to flee deeper into the tunnels. Arya guessed they aimed to secure hostages or escape to the sea. She signaled Belna and Aros, pushing through a cluster of crates. Two more pirates tried to bar their way, but Belna shot one with a short bow while Arya eviscerated the other with needle. They raced down a tunnel. Torchlight lit the rough walls, leading to a large chamber. Arya halted abruptly. This chamber was packed with crates, kegs, and half a dozen savage-looking men in mismatched armor. At the far side, a tall figure in black leather stood, a helmet shaped like a scorpion's tail on his head. The Sea Scorpion. He held a chained figure by the neck, a young villager, eyes wide with terror. At the scorpion's side stood a man wearing a tabard that bore a stylized crest of a boar's head, Lord Yelshir's symbol. Arya's heart lurched. She had guessed Yelshir was behind this, but seeing his emissary here confirmed it. The Sea Scorpion's cold gaze flicked over Arya and Belna. A mocking smile curved his lips. So, you're the ones who've been causing trouble. I've heard of you. The Wolf's assassins, yes? Arya's grip on Needle tightened. Let the hostage go. He laughed, cruel and resonant. So you do have a sense of humor. He shoved the terrified villager aside abruptly, sending them sprawling. I have no need of that one anymore. I have bigger fish to fry. The men around him advanced, swords raised. Aros stepped up, nerves steeled, and Belna notched an arrow. But the Sea Scorpion just watched as though relishing the conflict. Arya felt a wave of resolve. She would not let him leave this cave alive. Belna loosed an arrow, dropping one raider instantly. Aros engaged another, their blades ringing in the dim light. Arya faced a tall man with a dual-bladed axe, dodging the heavy swings. She recognized these men as seasoned killers, not the ragged pirates of earlier. The tall man nearly took her head off with a spinning strike, but she ducked, stabbing his knee, then finishing him with a thrust to the throat. She turned to see the Sea Scorpion step forward at last, drawing a slender cutlass with a wicked curve. His eyes flashed with confidence. Come on then, he taunted. Arya obliged, launching into a rapid flurry of thrusts. He parried with fluid skill, metal screeching on metal. He was fast, well-trained, not a common thug. She circled, feinting left, but he anticipated, hooking her blade aside. She felt the jolt reverberate down her arm. He countered with a slash that sliced across her upper arm, drawing blood. Arya hissed, ignoring the pain. Behind her, Belna grappled with another foe. Aros was bleeding from a cut on his forehead but still fighting, engaged with two raiders at once. Arya locked eyes on the Sea Scorpion again. She recognized that he wasn't purely Ireborn. His style had an Essosi flair, possibly Bravosi or Lysine. That meant he might be used to fighting water dancers like her. She changed tactics, dropping low to slash at his ankles. He blocked, foot snapping out to kick her in the ribs. Pain flared, but she rolled with the impact. They clashed again, cutlass versus needle, each searching for an opening. He was bigger, stronger, but she was faster. She tried to recall the lessons from Farrell. Use speed, agility, subtle angles. She pivoted, darted in close. Needle's point skittered along his cuirass, failing to penetrate, but she aimed a quick slash at his leg. He twisted away with surprising grace, punching the pommel of his cutlass toward her face. She barely slipped aside, feeling the rush of air. He sneered. You fight well, but you can't best me. Arya ignored his brag, launching a feint at his shoulder. He brought his blade up to parry. She reversed direction mid-strike, hooking his sword arm instead. Needle bit flesh, drawing a hiss of pain. He retaliated with a savage backhand that knocked Arya's head to the side, stars erupting in her vision. Her ears rang. She stumbled, forced to back off a few steps. Blood trickled from her lip. She tasted copper. The Sea Scorpion advanced, pressing his advantage. But Arya let him come, feigning more injury than she had. As he swung, she dropped to one knee, hooking Needle under his guard. The tip sliced across the strap of his armor, forcing him to twist awkwardly. She popped up, slamming her elbow into his face. He staggered, cursing. Now! Belna shouted from behind, finishing her own opponent with an arrow through the throat. She turned, raising her bow at the Sea Scorpion's back. He glimpsed the movement, cursed again, and twisted to put Arya between himself and Belna. Arya pressed him, slashing relentlessly, not giving him room to dodge aside. A savage grin twisted the Sea Scorpion's features. You think this ends with me? He spat. Lord Yelshir will Arya never let him finish. She drove Needle straight into his chest. His eyes went wide. She felt a hot gush of blood over her hand. His body jerked, the cutlass falling from his grip. He staggered, choking on his own breath. Then he collapsed to his knees, hateful eyes locked on hers. Damn, Wolf, he rasped, before toppling to the ground. Arya withdrew Needle, panting. Pain flared in her wounded arm and she pressed a hand to it, staggering. Belna rushed over, glancing around for more threats. Aros finally dispatched the last raider, sagging against a crate in exhaustion. The chamber was littered with bodies, blood mixing with salt water that seeped from the cavern floor. Arya's vision blurred momentarily from the knock to her head, but she focused on the man in the boar's tabard. He lay among the dead, an arrow in his gut. She nudged him with her foot, ensuring he wasn't merely feigning. His lifeless eyes stared up in shock. She stooped, searching his body for any documents, letters, anything to confirm Yelcher's involvement. She found a pouch of coins minted in Yelcher's keep, but more importantly, a small scrap of parchment detailing deliveries and payments with Yelcher's seal. That would be enough. They regrouped. Belna bound Arya's arm while Aros coughed, wiping blood from his brow. "We need to signal Gendry's men," Arya said hoarsely. Belna helped her up the corridor. At the cave's entrance, they lit a small green-flamed torch, the Watcher's prearranged signal. Soon, the thunder of hooves and the clash of steel echoed outside. Gendry's men closed in, cutting down any raiders who tried to flee. Shouts and screams filled the morning air. In the end, the pirates were trapped between Gendry's forces above and the Watchers within. Some tried to launch boats, but Harren and Naren, leading a small band of knights, set them alight with flaming arrows. The raiders' vessels burned, illuminating the raging waves. A final pocket of desperate men surrendered. Gendry's men took them prisoner, dragging them out of the caves in chains. By midday, the battle was over. Smoke curled from the wreckage of the boats. The sea scorpion lay dead in the depths of the cave, his dream of plunder ended by Arya Stark's blade. Gendry rowed down to the shore, where Arya and her watchers emerged, grimy and bloodstained. He dismounted, scanning their faces. "Any of ours lost?" he asked, voice tight. Harren shook his head. "A few wounded among your men, but we watchers are alive." "Barely." Arya stepped forward, forcibly straightening despite the pain. "We have proof tying Lord Yelcher to this. We found it on one of his men." She handed Gendry the scrap of parchment. He studied it, anger darkening his features. "That traitorous bastard. I'll see him brought to justice." Arya exhaled, the tension leaving her shoulders. The immediate threat was gone, but the realm's politics continued. Gendry would have to root out Yelcher's corruption. She was simply glad to have saved more lives and ended the sea scorpion's raiding. Gendry extended a hand as if to steady her. "Your arm," he said, eyes dropping to her bleeding bandage. "I'll live," Arya replied. But her vision swam. She realized she'd lost more blood than she cared to admit. Gendry caught her elbow, concern etched on his face. "Let the maester see to that." "You've done enough here," he said. Arya nodded, letting him guide her toward the waiting horses. Belna, Harren, Naren, and Aros followed behind, weary but victorious. One of Gendry's knights helped them mount up. A hush fell over the battlefield, broken only by the groans of wounded raiders and the crackle of burning boats. They rode back to Storm's End under an overcast sky that threatened more rain. Soldiers and watchers carried along the captives rescued from the cave's deeper recesses. A sense of grim relief settled on them. This part of the Stormlands would know peace, at least for a time. Arya felt the ache in her body, but also a small spark of satisfaction. Another evil undone. At the fortress, the wounded were rushed to the maester's chambers. Arya endured the sting of hot wine on her cut, the needle and thread that sewed it. She grit her teeth, thinking how she'd once endured blindness and beatings in Bravos. This was manageable in comparison. Gendry hovered, refusing to leave until the maester assured him Arya would be fine. Later, as night fell, a subdued feast was held in the Great Hall, not for celebration but to feed the weary soldiers and watchers. The keep bustled with talk of the successful attack. Arya, her watchers, and Gendry sat at a smaller table off to the side. Kessa managed to come for a short while, limping but alive, leaning on Dina's shoulder. They exchanged tearful smiles with Arya, each wordless look conveying gratitude. Gendry stood at one point, raising a horn of ale. He addressed his men, voice echoing in the hall. "Tonight we rest, for tomorrow we begin the hunt for the traitorous Lord Yelcher. Let no one doubt our resolve. We stand against raiders, pirates, and those who would bring chaos to the Stormlands. To my loyal knights, to Lady Arya Stark and her watchers, thank you." A brief roar of approval followed. Arya shifted in her seat at the mention of Lady. But she let it pass. These men might never understand the nuances of who she really was. But she could tolerate the courtesy. She felt Belna elbow her gently, smirking, and Arya rolled her eyes. After the meal, she slipped away to a quieter part of the keep. The same wall walk where she'd stood the night before. The sky was moonless, clouds dragging across the heavens. She leaned on the battlements, letting the cool breeze wash over her. Her arm throbbed, each heartbeat a reminder of how close she'd danced with death again. Footsteps approached. Gendry. She knew his tread by now. He joined her, resting his arms on the battlement, staring at the darkness. For a while they said nothing. The hush of the courtyard below, the distant hush of the sea, filled the space between them. Finally he spoke in a low voice. "This place owes you its safety. I owe you mine." Arya pressed her lips into a line. "You don't owe me anything. I did what needed doing." He nodded, a faint smile curving one corner of his mouth. "Yes, you always do." Silence settled again. Then he glanced sidelong at her. "Will you go now? Back to that hidden keep of yours?" She exhaled, letting the wind ruffle her hair. "I have people there who need me. I can't stay in one place for long." He made a low noise of acknowledgement. "I should have guessed. You're a wanderer, Arya. The wolf that roams." She turned, searching his face. "Does that bother you?" He looked down at his hands, rough as they were from forging in younger days. "It doesn't surprise me, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't wish we had more time together." He swallowed. "We've been fighting side by side for so long in one way or another. Sometimes I wonder if there's a place where we could just live." Arya felt a pang. She remembered the offer he'd once made her, to be the Lady of Storm's End, a memory tinged with youth and innocence. But she was different now. "I wouldn't be happy as a lady," she said softly. "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "I'm not asking you to be a lady. Just, if you ever tire of the road, or if you need a place to heal or to rest, Storm's End is open to you." She reached out, gently squeezing his hand. "Thank you. You're a good man, Gendry." She couldn't bring herself to make any promise. Her life belonged to the Watchers now. To the secrets in the shadows, the rescues that no one else would risk, the quiet vow she'd made long ago to protect the realm in her own way. His fingers lingered on hers a moment, warm and calloused. Then he let go, looking into the night. "At least let us ride together in the morning if you're well enough. We'll track Yelshire. He can't have gone far." Arya nodded, though she doubted she'd have the luxury of a second prolonged mission. She worried about her keep, about the new recruits, about the possibility of other threats lurking across the realm. But it wouldn't hurt to help Gendry tie up loose ends if it could be done swiftly. They parted eventually, each lost in their own thoughts. Arya found a small cot in a side chamber, exhaustion hitting her in a rush. She lay down, muscles aching, letting sleep drag her under. Her dreams were muddled, full of flickering shapes and half-heard voices, her father, Farrell, the kindly man from Bravos. She saw the faces of the Watchers, battered but unbroken, forging forward in a world too often cruel. When she awoke, sunlight shafted through the cracks in the shuttered window. She rubbed her eyes, propping herself up. The keep was stirring. She felt the scab on her wounded arm pull uncomfortably, but at least the bleeding had stopped. In the courtyard, she found Belna, Heron, and the others conferring with a small group of Gendry's men. They planned to ride out soon to pursue Yelshire. Word had arrived via Outrider that Yelshire was sighted traveling north with a small retinue. If they caught him quickly, good. If he escaped, he might foment more trouble. Arya considered her Watchers. Many were still nursing injuries. They'd done enough. She felt a responsibility to them. "Let Gendry handle Yelshire," she said. "We should get our wounded home." Belna frowned. "You sure?" Arya nodded. "We accomplished our goal? Yelshire's exposed. Gendry has enough proof to see him tried. I won't risk more of our people. We need to regroup." Heron breathed a sigh of relief, though he tried to hide it. They'd been through a brutal fight. Kessa still lay in the maester's chambers, needing time. Dina could barely walk unaided. Aros had a nasty cut that would take weeks to heal. Their strength was spent. So when Gendry approached, clad in his armor, preparing to ride north, Arya told him she would return to the keep with her Watchers and the rescued villagers who wished to come. Gendry looked disappointed but didn't argue. "Thank you again," he said quietly, handing her a small pouch of coin. "For supplies, for the wounded. Take it. Don't refuse this time." She accepted the pouch with a nod. Her Watchers could use the resources. "Farewell, Gendry." His gaze lingered. "Take care, Arya." With that, they parted, Gendry leading his knights out the main gate in pursuit of Yelshire, while Arya and her Watchers prepared their own smaller caravan. A few of the rescued families joined them, hoping to find safety and purpose at the keep. Others stayed at Storm's End, preferring Gendry's protection. The Watchers set off, traveling slowly to accommodate the injured. The journey south was arduous but uneventful. People recognized them as a ragtag group of travelers, nothing more. Arya kept an eye on the horizon, mindful of potential bandits or leftover raiders, but none appeared. The days bled together, setting up camp at dusk, rising at dawn, forging ahead. Kessa, Dina, and the others spent most of the time in wagons or on horseback, dozing fitfully. At last, they drew near the coast where the keep lay hidden. For Arya, the sight of that familiar rise of land and the battered towers rising above the trees stirred an odd mix of relief and sorrow. They had lost too many over the years, and yet they had saved so many more. This place was home, but it was also a reminder of the cost. Scouts whistled from the walls, recognizing their approach. The gates opened, watchers rushing to greet them. Jorel stood in the courtyard, arms folded, face lined with worry. A warm wave of welcome met them, watchers hurrying to help the wounded inside, to stable the horses, to offer water and blankets. The new families who had come found themselves enveloped in a quiet sense of belonging. Eyes watched them warily but kindly. Arya dismounted, biting back a grimace as her arm throbbed. Jorel approached, relief flooding his features. "I was about to send a search party. You were gone longer than we expected." Arya managed a small smile. "We had complications. But the raiders in the Stormlands are finished. Gendry will handle the rest." Jorel nodded, noticing the blood-stained bandage around her arm. "We'll see to that wound. And the others." She handed him the pouch of coin Gendry had provided. "Distribute this for supplies, improvements, whatever we need. We have more new arrivals, some freed captives. Find them a place." He accepted the pouch with a grateful nod. Then, lowering his voice, he added, "While you were gone, more travelers came. Orphans, outcasts from a border dispute in the Reach. They've been integrated. We're nearly at capacity, though. We need more resources." Arya sighed. "We'll manage. We always do." She glanced around, seeing how the keep's courtyard was bustling with watchers giving instructions, novices practicing with wooden swords, children chasing each other through the half-ruined corridors. It had grown into a small, secret community. A seed of pride formed in her chest. Despite the gloom and the violence, they were building something here, a haven, a chance for the vulnerable to learn to protect themselves and others. Yet her mind roamed ahead, already wondering what new crisis might arise. The realm was a tapestry of fragile alliances, haunted by old grudges. Perhaps Sansa would call upon her next, or the crown might find itself threatened by a new wave of would-be kings. The world never seemed short on men who wanted power at any cost. Later that evening, she wandered into the library hall. It was quiet, only a few watchers poring over scrolls by lamplight. Arya found a seat near a small brazier. The day's travel weighed on her, and she let out a slow breath, gingerly flexing her injured arm. The stitches pulled, but the wound was clean. The realm's conflicts had left their mark on her body, just as they had on her soul. The keep's reality enveloped her once more, teaching novices, scouting missions, caring for the wounded, planning the next move. She would continue the cycle, forging these people into the watchers Westeros needed. Not an army, not an official force, but a hidden blade protecting the small folk from the realm's endless troubles. And in so doing, she found a purpose that soothed at least part of her restless spirit. She had begun this path as Arya Stark, a lone wolf forging her own destiny, and she continued it now as the guide for a whole pack of silent guardians. She rose, leaving the library. Outside, the moon had broken through the clouds, casting the courtyard in pale light. She made her way to the tower where she slept. On her way, she passed by Kessa and Dina's quarters. Candlelight glowed within, and she heard soft murmurs. They'd be all right, eventually. Some scars would remain, as they did for everyone here. But scars were part of survival. Reaching the top of her tower, she pushed open the old wooden door. Her chamber was simple, a pallet, a small trunk for her few possessions, a worn chair by a tiny window. She sank onto the chair, unlacing her boots. Pain flared in her arm, and she reminded herself that she needed to let the wound heal properly. Perhaps she would rest a few days, rely on Jorel and others to train the recruits. But she knew in her heart that rest was always fleeting. She gazed out the window. The sea stretched away, dark and impenetrable, the moon's reflection dancing on its surface. Tomorrow, she would rise early, check on Kessa, see to the children, ensure resources were allocated. She would sharpen her sword, or run infiltration drills, or plan for the next time someone called on them for aid. She was no lady in a grand castle, no queen on a throne, but her role was no less vital to the realm's fragile peace. In the hush of the night, she let her thoughts drift to Gendry, to Sansa, to Jon somewhere in the far north, and to the family she had lost so long ago. She felt them with her sometimes, the ghosts of House Stark, proud and somber, watching over her. She hoped that somewhere her father could see the life she'd chosen, that he'd understand SW as carrying forth his sense of justice in a manner uniquely her own. She set Needle beside the bed, within easy reach. The single candle guttered, sending flickers of shadow dancing on the stone walls. In that wavering light, she thought she saw the shapes of wolves, slender and quick, weaving between the pillars. She closed her eyes and exhaled, feeling the tension melt, just for a moment. They called her many things now. The wolf, the ghost of the keep, the assassin who turned children into silent blades. But she was also a teacher, a protector, and a keeper of fragile hopes. One day, maybe the realm would no longer need such shadows. Maybe peace would truly take root. But until then, she would remain, training a generation to safeguard the innocent, one silent footstep at a time. She lay down, careful of her arm, letting the candle sputter out. Darkness embraced her, carrying her gently into dreams filled with the hush of midnight seas, the faint cries of wolves in winter forests, and the resolute heartbeat of a young girl who had once refused to be anyone but herself. Arya Stark slept, but her spirit stood vigilant, ready for the next call, the next threat, and the next dawn she would greet with a blade in hand and hope in her heart.